Hello everyone, welcome to Fleek's Random Ramblings 42.
Yes, the
After
Hawkins AA refit.
Dragon, do you mind?
I see.
do you mind? I was just... Oh, sod it. Anyway, hello everyone,
You
welcome
fool,
to...
meteor.
It won't, Sidious. Unfortunately, it won't.
I do not need my elevation drive to kill you,
Oh,
meteor.
no. That assumes, Sidious, you have hope. Hope is just the first step to disappointment, so if you remove hope, you're fine. No, we can't hear you, Fleet.
But I'm saying things. Look, I'm there. My things
It's
are coming
why
up.
saying you're dead.
I'm not dead.
All I'm going to say is that that M14 deserves it because it
Hello?
M14.
Hello?
Sprackensy Fleet?
Hello?
There we go.
Hello? Because it was saying I was speaking and Discord was picking up my thing. I tested it.
Why do you think we were saying that you were dead and such?
But I thought you two were having a laugh.
No.
Flea, would we do such a thing?
Yes. Yes, you absolutely would.
I mean, I would, but Dragon wouldn't.
Indeed, Brackman.
And this time I've actually got YouTube chat up in the right-hand side, so I won't forget it. Normal ramblings today. Possible appearances from the shipyard and Cyclic, and definite appearances from Dr. Clark, because, let's face it, that just happens now.
Never assume definite. For all we know, he's had a grand old disaster and a meteor struck his house. Though whether that would actually make it easier for moving house is debatable.
You act as if that would stop him. He would come in here to relieve stress after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it might be the catharsis of, having to deal with lawyers constantly.
Yeah. Right, okay, folks, let's get cracking. Normal ramblings. Here we go. AMC, would you like asking questions like this, don't you?
They would be potentially terrifying.
Let me read out the question. What if... AMC Woods asks, what if two fighter wings of P-51D and P-47Ds had been sent with crew, support personnel along with fuel and ammo for 6 months of non-stop operations back in time to the Western Front during World War I? When? When matters.
And also not much.
I'm sorry, but...
I don't much would change. They could potentially do a lot of damage.
6
Not
months,
really.
6 months of non-stop operations. P-51D and P-47.
The question is the P-47 a ground attack configuration?
If it's P-47D, it's still 2 fighter wings. That's not insignificant. Fighter wings are not small units.
It is.
Yeah,
It's not like the F-15 question last time.
It kind of is.
It's not, because unlike the F-15s, the P-47s are still in range of heavy machine guns of the time.
Yeah, how effective were heavy machine guns against World War II era aircraft, except in very niche circumstances?
Against ground attackers,
they were very good at limiting the effectiveness of ground attackers.
Yeah.
Remember, ground attackers in general were very ineffective in all but a morale-destroying role.
Well, yeah,
they would be very effective at taking out morale.
Well, no,
Again,
that was only against armor. Against fortifications,
even against
and soft targets, the ground attack aircraft were very effective.
No, they were limited effectiveness. Because against infantry, there is this thing called hull.
Like, theoretically speaking, if they just went to strafe infantry, they could do pretty well. Against actually some of the proper fortifications,
carrying fuel and ammo, 500 and 1,000 pounders plus rockets, which are not available during the period.
Not gonna do much.
No,
it's nothing bigger than what's already being thrown around.
No, it massively is. It is. It's a huge difference. Aircraft.
Both sides are bringing up 8-inch artillery.
Yes, but there's a difference. Yes, but there's a difference between an 8-inch shell, which may hit its target, it may not, and a 1,000-pound bomb that can be planted pretty much anywhere you want it.
No, it's what? No,
you're overestimating accuracy.
You're underestimating the effectiveness of aircraft.
Yes, but they are not PGMs.
And
They don't have the accuracy. Remember, it takes thousands of these aircraft.
you.
Two fighter wings won't.
For the
I
logistics.
genuinely
Two
feel
fighter
like
wings
you
won't
two are
greatly change the
massively.
effect of things.
I feel like you two are massively What books are you? What history books and sources are you reading about this? Some type ineffectiveness.
Rex's Hangar and the Chieftain primarily.
That's against
Yeah.
armor, not
No, it's
general
not.
ground
No, it's not.
forces. Yes, it is.
This is against both.
Yeah, but it's also 2 wings isn't the scale needed for World War II era aircraft to be effective. On anything more than a small tactical scale.
A small tactical
We're
scale may
talking
be all that's
fronts?
needed.
No, but
Yeah.
it's World War One.
And a lot of
It's
these,
World War One,
a
where
lot of
battles literally are millions versus millions.
okay, well, no, those are campaigns. If we're talking about actual offensives, you're looking at more in the range of hundreds of thousands, and you're not looking at sectors of front more than 10 to 12 miles in length. 2 fighter wings
Yeah,
applied.
alright.
Two
Yeah,
fighter
you want
wings.
to-
Yeah.
Two fighter wings applied in the right place at the right time. Blow holes in wire, shatter the front lines.
No, they don't. They don't.
Why not?
I guess why would they shatter the front
No,
line?
because the front lines are hardened
Foxo,
against large caliber artillery.
no, they're not.
You don't.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. That fleet. That's a part of the fucking issues the Entente has in 1916.
Like,
And
to be
the
fair,
forces are so dug in. Artillery isn't very effective,
keep in mind,
which is why chemical weapons become one of the few ways to effectively kill.
I would like to point out
Oh
Somme
my
in
god.
1916 was an excellent
The
example of where there was
stereotypes
a
being
week-long
the
bombardment.
stereotypes being quoted and the lack of knowledge being displayed is just
No.
What?
Fleet.
Where-
Fleet. Are you aware of why chemical weapons were
no.
so effective?
No, that's
and
not-
conventional artillery. No. I'm making a point here. Are you aware of why chemical weapons were effective when conventional munitions were seeing a massive drop-off in effectivity against modern fortifications at the time?
Yes. There was a brief lull between the arrival of heavier artillery en masse. There was a period between 1915 and 1917 where there was a chronic shortage of medium heavy guns, aka heavy guns you could field en masse in the 6 to 8 inch range, to reliably penetrate below basic trench level into the fortified below ground shelters that German troops were using during preliminary bombardment that they would then leave to take their defensive positions after the bombardment ended.
Yes. And are you aware of the Germans' response to the larger artillery pieces?
Yes, they dug deeper.
They dig deeper.
I'm aware of this. However, let me
Do you
ask,
know why chemical weapons... No, let me finish my point. Do you know why chemical weapons, compared to conventional weapons, was able to amplify and negate this digging deeper survivability against conventional high explosive?
Yes, I know, because the gas can seep in through the ground and through the basically unshielded
Not
because
necessarily
NBC
seeping,
protection.
actually.
Then seep, get into the shelters. But what I would say is you've
No, let me finish.
Mm.
And you're aware that even then,
okay.
most combat losses was by artillery crews who couldn't dig in against chemical weapons. And that compared to conventional weapons against artillery crews, chemical weapons were the most effective. So what do you think adding more of an ineffective attack type is going to do in this situation to change it?
I mean, you're acting like this is a gotcha, but you've completely missed.
Yeah, no. But what I'm asking is, what's different about these munitions that are being dropped compared to everything else?
It's not the
Aside
munitions
from the
that are
fact they're on
different.
plane.
It's not the munitions. Well, the munitions are more effective, first of all. The bombs are just bigger and more powerful. But that doesn't really matter, as you've said. It's not the munitions themselves. It's how and when they're being dropped. So, for example, with if they can get radio communications between ground and air using the aircraft radios, this is even better. But even if they can't, it still works. The aircraft are fast enough, carry enough bombs, and have enough endurance that they can do something that artillery of the period just can't do. The artillery of the period can, well, basically,
Something wrong? Fleet, is your mic fully working, just to confirm?
No, my mic's working fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
At least 3 people have said your mic appears to be acting up.
There's nothing wrong with my
Emu,
mic.
Collingwood, and Clark.
There's nothing wrong with my mic. It's fine.
It's low quality than normal.
It occasionally
It
cuts
shouldn't
out, but I
be.
wouldn't have necessarily said those two minutes.
Yeah,
Can't hear
it's almost like when I'm talking my VAT, sort of.
It shouldn't be a problem.
Jeez.
Once,
What's compression like on it? 'Cause it might be compression.
and this time I've actually got YouTube. Oh, good lord! Why is
Sound
that
you're
like that?
talking through a
Ugh.
tin can. Right, Timu,
There.
the reason Fox's sounds weird is she was changing some of her mic settings.
Why is it?
So
doing
she's
Voice
sounds
that?
changer settings.
If she sounds like she's been on...
Hello, hello, hello. Yeah,
why.
my mic's coming through fine. Like according to
I
Discord,
can
my
hear you
mic's
mostly
fine.
fine, but at least a couple of people are
What
saying
the
that
hell's
there's
going
problems.
on? On my stream, it's apparently quite bad as well. What the heck?
It would be it would be weird if it was both though. Sounds like Phil Collins. Why does that name ring a bell? But
But
I said personally, you sound fine to me, but
I don't understand it. What the
No.
heck?
Oh, strange. It's like it's a compression issue on my end.
I'm
try
not seeming to have
something.
that.
What's
Please
your
sound
internet
relatively
like?
My internet's
Plus, it's like
fine.
your audio goes from fine to
Are you,
cutting out to a
Clark's
quality.
asking, are you on a
hello?
mic or a
Hello?
laptop mic?
No, it's fine. No, it's I'm testing it on my
Yeah.
on my stream, and it's coming out fine through my own headphones. Like, what's going on? I'm on my mic, my normal mic, the mic I've been using for ages. Okay, apparently I'm okay for Timu. It must just be one of those things.
Discord might be acting up? Question mark?
It's possible. It could be. Because you just went fuzzy for me for a second then.
Huh?
Yeah, you just
That's
you just went the same for me as I was on my own stream just then.
Oh, it's connectivity then.
My connectivity hasn't.
No, it's
Well, it's his
Discord.
connectivity.
It's possible.
No, they're all saying we're all cutting out.
Wow.
That's clearly. This seems like an issue. Give me a moment.
I think it's a Discord issue.
Yes.
Seems like a Discord issue.
Uh,
Possibly.
Apparently, no issues detected. API response time within normal.
The PBJ had a version with a 75
Yeah,
mil.
apparently now we're all
I can
fine
believe
for better. Right, okay. Just to quickly go back to what I was saying. It's not about the weapons the aircraft bring. It's how they can deploy them and the difference they bring to offensive action. So,
Honestly, I suspect them probably being best at striking rear lines and supplies.
well, they can do
That's
that.
where they'll probably
but,
make the most of effort.
but the thing is, you've basically got a force that's guaranteed to wire break because it can plant those bombs with more accuracy than an artillery in the rear can. And, at the same time, the Germans can't do the whole wait for the artillery to die down and then the infantry go over the top and, we shoot them as they come over. Because the fighters can just circle and attack enemy strong points and machine guns with directed ordnance without much risk of friendly fire to infantry, which you can't have in the First World War until the advent. It's basically the arrival of creeping barrage early, basically.
But that's already been a thing.
Also,
Not till later on.
It's like
not till later on in the conflict.
Yeah, but this was in 1917, if I remember correctly.
No.
I didn't actually say.
What did I say?
It just says at some point. It was rise at World War II.
But if it's
Oh, World War One, sorry.
But the issue is with this win is to use the compare. It's how do I say this?
Also, if I'm getting this correct, roughly this means there'll be 60p 51s and 60p 47s.
That's not insignificant numbers of aircraft, but it's not. It's not war winning by itself. It's not war. Yeah, it's not war winning by itself. You've got to connect it to other things. I mean,
even connected to other things. I think it might be more of a case of you would deploy them for when you need that one battle won sort of thing.
Yes, like if
it is a
But
very.
wouldn't it be that? Because
I think they could have some decent effects because, as I said, I do agree they're not going to break. I don't think they're going to break the front line, and even if they do break the wires, well, both sides use runners. So while it's a bit slow, it still works. I don't think they will break front lines, but in combination between artillery and infantry, as well as basically them striking the back, might actually give them the chance to do so.
Yeah, but just to answer Brackman's thing, but with the issue of them striking the backline and ammo depots, an issue of World War One is World War One is the quintessential war of production.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a reason in France it's got several French books I've got on it, and I use the French. It's called the early part of World War One is called the War of Timetables.
Yeah, because
With battles being decided on the mobilization timetables for trains. They don't. Any battle's going to be decided on economic mobilization. The raw amount of how many shells, how many men can you get to the front line. And my issue with these aircraft being effective is
Also,
how do you disrupt that?
Also, I do have another point here.
Because you've got 60 P-47s and P-51s.
So,
like,
here's the thing: they get the crew and the support personnel. But the thing I see here is actually
and spares.
And I'm going off the human thing here for a reason. Will the actual command know what to do with them?
I mean, as long as
I don't think the actual generals that are organizing this will be able to use these for granted. They will think of close air support of this sort of scale. I think my close air support to this point was dropping like a 5 or 10 pound bomb sort of thing every now and then to take out certain positions.
Or if you were lucky and had a large fighting scout, a 200-pound bomb, singularly, if you were lucky.
If you're very lucky. And then the problem is then you might get jumped by fighters. If anything, these planes will be excellent for recon. Because what can stop them?
Yes, but that's pretty much a...
Yeah.
No.
They will they will be able to point out where the biggest enemy positions are.
Well, no, they're not, because they're not recon aircraft. You can't... they're not set up for the role.
You can still recon.
No, but you are right, just not in the way you think. They're going to be fantastic at defending reconnaissance aircraft.
Clark saying, really? World War II aircraft and World War I?
Oh, here he comes. I knew you were coming!
So, something we were talking about earlier is just eyebrow raise and sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Of how you always know when Clark's disapproving of something. Oh, there we go.
Hello? Hey, there he is.
A meteorite did not strike his house.
How's your voice, Dr. Clark?
It's talking, right?
Well, yes,
yep,
but how's the pneumonia?
I'm on a lot of pain. I am on a lot of painkillers and a lot of different antibiotics.
We've got giggly Dr. Clark.
Mood kindred! Necrosis is fun.
I am having fun.
Right, okay, so the question...
Pneumonia in both lungs.
So the question we're currently stuck on, debating
And
rather.
don't worry, the doctors at first thought I was were trying to send me to hospital for high blood pressure.
Weren't they also the people who kept you outside for like 7 hours?
Yes, because they didn't do a check to see, and then when they did an X-ray, went, "Oh, we know why you have high blood pressure now." Really? You have pneumonia in both lungs. In the bits of the lungs which are difficult for people to hear with stethoscopes.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Got her, officer?
So,
I will remind you the ferry battle existed, so
yeah. So
give it a break on the pea shooter.
yeah.
We'll get to that one in a bit.
Yeah, look, I've got to get through this question.
Aircraft is
Right.
fun.
So it's 60. So it's a wing. It's a wing of P-51Ds and a wing of P-47Ds with crew,
Which is
support
equivalent to 60
personnel,
planes.
fuel and ammunition for 6 months of non-stop operations back in time to the Western Front. We've got three competing thoughts.
When are they
here.
turning up on the Western Front?
We don't
never
know.
told,
No
so it's sort of
one
a
said.
steaming-
Well, they're American aircraft, so are they turning up with the American Expeditionary Force?
It's a very good
In which
question.
case, they turn up in 1918, pretty much.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We
So if we go-
were
I thought we were sort of going off 16, 17-ish.
Yeah, we were going off like basically,
In which
you know,
case
they're
they are attacked with some sort of Condor Legion to the British.
yeah,
Or
possibly,
Eagle Squadron
yeah,
to the British.
something like that is what we were going with. There were three
They're
different.
probably integrated with the Royal Naval Air Service because they can actually support and sustain that. The Royal Flying Corps has constant issues with its logistics throughout the war.
Yeah,
It likes to try and blame the RNAS for their contracts with companies, but the RNAS turns around and goes, just because we remember to add spare parts onto our contract orders doesn't mean we're doing something evil. It's just you order aircraft like they're cavalry horses, and we order them like they're machines.
yeah. So the
The Army didn't like the Navy retorting that one, but it was the
That's-
real case.
That is
Literally,
the
the Army put a cavalry officer in charge of procurement of the aircraft, and he was ordering aircraft like they were horses. Whereas the Royal Navy put a destroyer officer in charge of the procurement, an engineering destroyer officer, who understood that to maintain machines, you need spare parts. And that set up the entire World War I fight between the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service over the evil practices of the RNAS when it came to industry.
I've actually got a book on that I need to still read through, is the Service of the Royal Naval Air Service.
So we've got
It's a fun bit of history.
Yeah.
Just reading the whole fights and the Army telling the Navy they are being evil and they're using their industrial might to overwhelm them. And the Navy are going, what do you mean? Well, you're getting all these spare parts. Yes, but we wrote that into the initial contracts. Why would you do that? Because they're machines. They break.
Okay.
But you actually have made me thought, honestly, the Royal Naval Air Service might actually be quite happy with these, because how would these work against boats, potentially?
Okay, quick question.
Oh, just think about how they'd work against Zeppelins.
Yeah.
Quick question.
And the Gopher Gopher raids.
Yeah. Don't horses break as well?
Technically speaking, yes, but
if
you don't
you
need
ride
spare
them too
parts
hard.
horses, you need spare horses.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, but you have stuff like horseshoes, feet.
yes,
riding
but it's
equipment.
different.
You're
Yeah, but
assuming they're
that's
going to live
different.
that long.
Yeah. Look.
Hey, I've
look,
seen a
Also,
hot.
the Army
I
already
need-
has farriers and everything built into them, whereas they didn't have the machinery component built into them.
Look.
We're not talking about the Army of World War II, which was used to running lorries and tanks and all sorts of vehicles. We're talking about the Army from beginning of World War One, and in that period, which was just about getting around the idea that maybe horse and wagon was not the future of logistics.
Yeah. Look, I have to get us back on topic quickly because I've got I actually do have a lot of questions to get through
We've
this
now
time
got a decent number
unusually.
of questions, yeah.
And I have YouTube questions from Knight6831 to get
What
through
you
as
do?
well.
Cyclic.
So, yes,
Hi, Knight.
he's come
Are
to
you
torment
listening?
me. He's come to torment me. Bless
Hi,
him.
Knight.
But, okay, so very quickly, we've currently, I'm just going to put a hole in this question. I'm just going to so we've got 3 different points of view. My point of view is that they'd be very useful for two purposes. You can use them to basically replace a creeping barrage by basically shattering German trench lines right before the infantry hit them and breaking the wire with their 500,000-pound bombs and rockets. And with drop tanks, they can do either logistics striking, or you can send the P-51s and P-47s to bomb the High Seas Fleet!
I don't think P-47s get drop tanks, do they? P-47D in particular. I'm not sure if they get the drop tank.
were developed, I believe,
Right.
for them. I'd have to double check that, but I believe they were developed and could be used on the...
But if they're operating
They do.
from northern France, they'll be able to
American
reach to
warplanes.
Germany.
This should work.
Yeah, they could certainly
Yeah.
do some stuff. They could do a lot of interdiction, a lot of counter artillery hunting. that sort
Oh,
of
that's
deal.
a really good thing.
Artillery crews are very, how do I put this? Very vulnerable to 50 caliber armor piercing incendiary.
I think artillery crews will very much dislike them, but actual fortified positions, I'm not sure how effective it would be.
HVAP rockets
Not
and 500
particularly.
pound. Oh, really?
Yeah,
No, they're nowhere near accurate enough for that.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
I mean, so what they
You don't need
would
it to be as accurate in some regards, also because you have to remember that what those positions are designed to deal with versus what you're going to be chucking them is very different. If I was actually, in the nicest way, I wouldn't even bother going after the artillery positions. I'd go after the ammunition dumps.
that too. That's a huge
50
one.
cals,
That's the
you can
biggest.
take down. Those dumps are huge, and if you take them out, then an artillery gun becomes a metal tube sitting in a place. That's
Yeah, and
difficult
keep
to
in
move around.
mind, these aren't modern insensitive munitions. These are artillery shells with TNT in them.
They will go
You can
boom.
make- You
An
will make some
API
very
will
big
penetrate
bangs.
any casing, and it does so with an incendiary effect.
Though they very quickly get hardened against counter battery artillery, because the ammo
There's
tend to be very close to the actual artillery piece at this point.
not the big ones, because the big
No.
ones are far enough in the rear that they're safe.
Oh, well.
And those are the ones you really want to hit.
Right.
You
So,
know,
yes,
to
You hit those
what I can-
on day one.
so
they'll
from my
run out of
perspective,
shells
yes, we'll
within a
have
couple
a
of weeks.
drop tank. Sorry.
As for what you would use if once you transition to attacking away from this towards attacking frontline positions, what they would be using for frontline positions is not rockets and not conventional bombs. They'd be using loads and loads and loads of napalm.
Oh, God,
is
they do
what
have
was-
napalm, don't they? I'd completely forgotten about
Yeah.
that.
Loads of napalm, loads of strafing on the trenches themselves. They can pretty easily suppress the communications trenches just with 50 cal.
Could they
But
wire break?
napalm is going to be devastating. No, you're not wire breaking with 50 cal.
No, I mean with
but-
500 and 1,000 pound bombs, because they could plant them. They're not accurate.
That's not all. That's not that effective. It wire breaking with explosives, unless you're talking Bangalore torpedoes that are specifically designed for it, is not effective.
Also, once you've taken out their artillery, use your own artillery to suppress their machine gunners, and frankly, your engineers can just cut the wire
Yeah.
easily. That basically,
you'll
that's
be
what
able
you
to
do.
mass-
You've taken out their artillery. They can't use their artillery to attack you at range, and you can use your artillery to just suppress their machine gunners. So you don't have to do creeping barrage or anything complicated. You just keep shelling the life out of their positions while your troops advance over. And once they get close enough, they fire up a flare. The artillery stops firing, and the troops pour in, going, "Hello."
And guess what your air does?
They need
Start
the ones-
suppressing the reserves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once the Entente have achieved a breakthrough, because this seems to be inevitable given what we've discussed, and the P-51s and P-47s are freed up, I can't help but think that since Dr. Klotz put them with the Royal Naval Air Service, certain officers might get ideas about sending them to bomb the High Seas Fleet in Kiel and Wilhelmshaven.
I can tell you the High Seas Fleet light screening forces are just gone. They don't even need to carry bombs for that.
50
Like,
cals
they
to do the
don't.
job.
They did it in World War II, like against far larger destroyers. These things, no.
So in this case, though, assuming we're going to use them against light fleet elements, would it be better for them to use the actual bombs or the HVARs? Do you think?
Oh no,
I mean,
machine
they
guns.
can carry all of it.
50
Yeah,
cal.
machine guns will do fine.
The machine
Yeah, I mean,
guns will do
against
fine,
potential
but I mean,
cruisers and such.
they can carry bombs and rockets
Yeah.
too. I mean, At that
Yeah,
range,
they can carry up to
with a
10 H-bars
P-47,
or
it's not
two
gonna restrict
2 or
them.
3 bombs.
Yeah.
Two 1000s or I think 3 500s.
You're probably better off
So
with
a
two 500s.
P-47D, depending on where you're operating from, if they're operating from northern France, or even closer, they could do that with two 1000s.
Probably operating from Belgium if they're with the Royal Naval Air Service.
Yeah, like they have like several 1,000-pound bombs and 10 HFARs, and then the absolute absurd amount of 50 cal the P-47 can carry. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be on a protected or even armored cruiser that starts taking 1,000-pound general purpose bomb hits. That's
That
not a
would
good
tend to
day.
be a very fiery and ultimately short, but certainly significant emotional event.
I mean, honestly, they can even make it even more devastating because with the lack of rapid-fire anti-aircraft fire coming back the other way.
Oh, they have free reign.
Oh yeah, like
They have
I mean,
absolute free reign.
they can skip bomb if they want. Slam the bombs into the unprotected sides of the ships. Just absolutely
Was there US
ruin their
doctrine for skip bombing?
The U.S.
The P-47s?
Marines, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army Air Corps did it all the time.
Right.
So yeah, that's absolutely going to be in the
So
playbook.
it's definitely plausible.
Yeah.
And unlikely, given they have free reign. They can just approach on the best angle.
Well, so skip bombing was actually done as a response to anti-aircraft fire.
Oh,
Yeah. In the Pacific. Because you could release your bombs farther away from trying to get an accurate shallow dive. Because
Oh.
they can't do a steep dive in these, right?
no.
They're not designed around it.
Yep.
Shallow dive bombing is not a very safe thing to do.
No.
It is fun though.
Oh yeah, well, and they're fighter pilots, but they do tend to like to come home.
That's
But
what
in
went
this-
through my head.
in this
it was
environment-
literally- it's fun though, and they are fighter pilots, so they will probably try it occasionally,
Well,
just
they can-
for the joy of being able to saying they did it. But honestly, they won't do it that often.
Yeah, they can do like whatever they want in this environment because their anti-aircraft threat is effectively rifle caliber fire, whether that's from rifle or rifle caliber machine gun. So Maxims, and then you have some small
You got
single shot
88s,
manual
I think, with
loading AA guns.
Yeah,
and
88s of the
that's
German
not gonna
fleet's
be.
main AA.
Good luck hitting.
There's-
Good luck
there's-
hitting any.
No
of
There's
way.
not enough of them. They don't
No.
have the rapid training that they'd be able to need to engage these aircraft. They're flying way too fast.
Well, would it be enough to act as a deterrent, though?
No.
If you don't have a way
No,
to get
it's-
more of them, would you still go in for the risky attacks
They're
if
not
there's a
going to
hail
suffer
machine gun
meaningful
fire?
losses. They don't have to get within machine gun fire. Like rifle caliber machine guns are barely a threat to these aircraft. Like obviously you can get a lucky
How do I
hit,
put
but
this? It's Let me put
There's
it
a-
this way. For all intents and purposes, they are like F-22s in modern air-to-air combat. That's it.
They're a
That's
cheat
the
code.
scenario you're dealing with. Actually, no. F-22s taking on, I don't know, MiG-15s, MiG-17s. That's the equivalent scenario we're talking about. Because of the rapid pace of technological change between the 1940s and the 1910s.
Brackman's bringing up the point of would they potentially be able to strike at Berlin, and also how effective would that actually be?
not really. And the reason for that is so the way these aircraft were able to do those escorts is they're flying at high altitude, albeit it's not as efficient as it would be for a jet, but it's still pretty efficient. They're flying with very little on the wings outside of drop tanks, which as soon as they're empty, they drop to minimize drag. So I don't think they'd be really doing much around Berlin.
No.
There's not too much of a meaningful thing for them to do.
I
The
do-
deeper stuff
One
they'd
might
be
sent
doing
on a
would be
civil
hunting
mission
trains.
to machine gun the palace,
that seems
just to make a point.
It's possible.
Yeah, most
You
of what
keep
they'd be
sending
doing.
Zeppelin raids to us. We'll
Yeah.
show you we can strike back.
Funny thing is, that actually
Yes.
does tie into something I was going to say, is that one of the things these aircraft would likely do is not hunt airships when they're in the
Eviscerate the
sky.
entire Zeppelin fleet.
Yeah, probably on the
very
ground.
quickly.
And then when the giant aircraft appear, they won't try and get them when they're in the air, or maybe they will, but they'll probably try and get the air bases they operate from in Belgium. So the Giants and the Gothers.
Yeah, basically we're talking about are mostly grass strips.
Well, no, you're going after the aircraft when they're on the ground, rather than,
Yeah, but yes, because you don't have radar to guide you in.
Yeah.
So-
um,
some-
the
So some very sorry, go on, Cyclic.
there's another big impact you're gonna probably see once people realize it. So broadly in World War One, logistics is based on rail.
Yeah.
So it's brought up to the rear of the combat area by rail, and then moved out.
Usually by more rail, smaller rail.
You know what proved to be a very, very good locomotive hunter?
The P-51
Fighter bombers. You know what these are?
Fighter bombers.
Because 50 cal will eviscerate the boiler on a locomotive, and once you do that, there's no more locomotive. It explodes.
Yep. Well, either explodes
Trains
or is
tend to like
rendered.
having their boilers.
Yeah, it either explodes
Usually
or the
in
boiler
Well,
catastrophically fails
you
and just
always
won't hold
remember
steam.
a boiler, doesn't matter if it's a ship or a train, a steam boiler is basically a pipe bomb which you're controlling.
Yeah,
That's literally what you're talking about. It's kind of like when we're talking about nuclear power. That is don't even like to use the phrase controlled reaction. It is a monitored reaction that we try to manage to sustain power and to not allow it to run away uncontrolled, because that tends to create a boom. With a steam boiler, you basically have it for it to function at its most efficient. It's also functioning at a level at which it will quite happily disintegrate the boiler into a big explosion if it suddenly has issues.
yep. Safety
And
valves
50
are wonderful
cals
things.
are a significant issue.
Yeah. Although I would point out, very rarely in the Second or First World Wars do you get boiler explosions from strafing. Most of the time, because of the way machine gun fire works in relation to piercing boilers, you're looking at the boiler basically fundamentally ceases to function. You've put multiple holes in it, pressure. Because the thing is, because of the way machine gunning a boiler works, unless you catastrophically prevent pressure escaping, so aka you're somehow causing the either you shoot the safety valve off or you somehow jam that shut. You're putting holes in a boiler in a manner that's causing steam to rapidly escape and pressure to rapidly dissipate. A lot of the things you see from gun camera footage are steam locomotives shrouded in clouds of steam as their boilers rapidly lose pressure, but very rarely do their boilers
There's
explode.
also a lot. There's also a lot of where you see
standing
the
in front of
rapid.
that steam when it comes out.
It's hot.
Anywhere near that.
Yes, it's hot, and the crew
It's
are
more than
probably
hot.
dying.
Yeah, so whilst it's not an explosion, as in it doesn't go boom, the boiler, there is certainly...
It's still rapidly disassembling things.
Yes, it really
Yes.
is. I just wanted to make it. I just wanted to be a little bit nerdy here because boiler explosions are a very specific thing.
Wow, Knight has got a fair nice of questions, and
He
apparently
has.
your mic is not right.
Oh no, that was earlier,
Anyway,
I believe.
So right, since we've covered this one relatively well enough, I think
So now I'm switching over to.
there's a lot of questions building
I'm
up.
going to alternate between
Yeah,
YouTube
especially
and
from
Discord.
Knight. There's about
So,
10 of them.
Knight6831 asks, Fleet, had the County-class guided missile destroyers adopted a pedestal twin missile launcher design, which we know about, where would that save weight have been used? Me, personally, I haven't the funkiest. Luckily, I have
This is
people
something
here
I've
who
shipped
may
out
actually...
Cyclics knowledge.
Yes, or...
Trying to- I
the
would
main
need to
thing they were looking at
familiarize
was the
myself with
helicopter
the main
stowage.
thing. I would need. Can someone familiarize me here with what the proposed thing for the
The
counties?
county class.
What was the question again, Fleet?
Had the County-class guided missile destroyer adopted a pedestal twin rail missile launcher design, which we know about, where would the save weight have been used?
What is this in place of? The Sea Slug?
For the
Like,
counties?
are they talking like a different missile instead of Sea Slug? Like
twin arm missile launcher. I assume this is for.
To be honest,
Like, are we talking a refit with Sea Dart? I mean, that would be dramatically more effective in a SAM roll, but I'm not 100% clear on what's.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it's being replacing.
asked.
Is it replacing one of the twin 4.5s forward?
I would hope not, because that's eventually where the 4
it's replacing the
exosets go.
surface-to-air missile. That's the only one that has a twin pedestal system. But I would say, and I only know this as much of this because my dad was involved, as discussed many times, in many of the ship's designs and construction programs, and County Class was one of the ones he was involved in. The naval architects all hated the aviation facilities they had designed because they had to have so many compromises sorted out. And any save weight, especially top weight they had, would have gone into improving the aviation handling facilities for the
Is there even a hangar?
For the helicopters.
Did they have a hangar? Because looking at photos, I'm not seeing an obvious hangar.
It's on the side.
On the side.
It's a side entry.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a side
that's
entry
what.
hangar.
Okay, so that's offset. Okay, ooh.
So you
It's
can
a port
understand
side
why
entry
the naval
with a-
architects would have really liked to have changed that. Yeah.
That I'm.
So that's
I
where the
think
extra weight's
that's
going.
only
Yeah.
marginally better than the U.S. Navy, like extendable hangar that got put on some of the DEs/FFs.
Yeah.
That leaked.
It's marginally better, but it's still intriguing, and naval architects all hated it, but they had to. That was the only way they could make the top weight issues work with that design. So if they've saved any weight at all, the naval architects are going to go for that. They're not going to add in extra weapons or anything else. They're
No.
going to fix what they've already got there
Mhm.
as the priority
Yeah.
to put in.
To be honest,
Yeah.
you could also ditch the 3/4 of the length of the ship's magazine, which is located on 3 deck.
Yeah.
Well, you got to have somewhere to store any sort of missiles. Like if it's Sea Dart,
Yeah.
you're
but you're not
you're
gonna be
probably
building
going to
it
have
as
to
you
go with a
aft.
magazine there. Yeah, you could probably fit in a decent horizontal magazine under the flight deck and hangar fairly well. Let's also, I see some people in chat trying to bring up the Canadian. We're not going to talk about that today. Okay, I just beat a migraine. We're not talking about Canadian Sea Sparrow launcher.
I'm curious about that, but I'm not going to bring it up then.
We can talk about that another day.
Dr. Clark, no. This is for once.
I want to be nice to my northern neighbors today.
For once, I get to pull.
They got beaten up at the NATO summit a lot. I want to be nice to them.
This is my
Don't
show.
worry, Fleet. We'll just turn your. Don't worry, Fleet. We'll just turn it against you later.
This is
if
my
you're
show.
trying to
I
say
give
about
the
this.
orders.
Look,
I am the one in charge here.
Shall we talk about French pre-dreadnought designs
No, don't you
instead?
dare! Don't you dare swing that on me.
I don't mind. That's going to irritate Fleet.
Stop
To be fair,
it!
we could always talk about Ben or even just French dreadnought design.
Don't you
Or
even!
the Hoche, of course.
Come
we
on,
do need to
people!
probably talk about Hoche in
People,
detail.
please, come on. I can only take so much punishment.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Next question.
Right,
Fleet.
okay,
Tell me
so-
again what that
I believe-
Spanish cruiser
Uh,
is that you really love.
Shush. Darth Sidious asks, how close was the U-boat campaign in World War One to knocking Britain out? When the second phase of unrestricted submarine warfare restarted, the Kaiser's U-boats were probably at their deadliest they had been for the entire course of the conflict. You had the UB-3s coming on strength in numbers, and the UB-3 is basically just, oh, look at that, it appears to be a Type 7, but earlier, basically. You've got the U-cruisers ranging out to the coast of the US, and they're very effective in that role. They'd get more gun kills than they do torpedo kills. Basically, in the period prior to US entry into the war, when there's very little protection off the US coast, their effectiveness diminishes as the US Navy gets its act together and starts aggressively patrolling the Atlantic seaboard. You see the U-cruisers sort of die away, and the UB-3s and other boats of the similar size come to the fore. It's widely.
Never say the US government and the British government cannot force their navies to relearn the same lessons two
Yeah.
times over.
Um,
It's amazing. The navies spend the entire interwar period going, we need anti-submarine warfare capability. Get to war. We're going to rapidly build it. And the beginning of the war, their involvement in war, same things happen for both sides over again.
yeah.
But no,
base...
the fun fact about that period, of course, is that the Germans actually come closer to beating the British with submarines in World War One than they do in World War Two.
Yeah.
They come far closer in that period.
Yeah.
That's how dangerous it is.
Yeah, one of the interesting caveats that is a not history scenario that doesn't usually get mentioned is basically because the British adapted by really introducing convoy systems, making it work in a way that makes sense. They adapt to the...
And converting Flower-class sloops from minesweepers to Q ships and escorts.
Yep. And the correct German response to that would have been some early, very basic form of the Wolfpack system, to sort of fall on convoys with more U-boats at a time. Obviously, it would have
system.
Yeah, obviously,
No,
it
that
would have
wouldn't
been.
work in that period.
It would have been. It
possible
would have
for that.
It would have been more basic. You would have basically had to have the boats.
Fleet. It's not. It would have been more basic. It was impossible to coordinate.
No, they'd had to been on surface making loud radio transmissions, and these are the Germans in both World War One and World War Two. They do not understand the concept of low power transmission. So in the nicest way, the moment they try and do Wolfpack coordinations of radios, there's going to be a huge flashing neon sign, submarines here.
It's not so much that, it's more that just like sending the U-boats out in packs of 2 or 3. Rather than trying to coordinate any... Sort of, you need to basically bulk
and then
up.
when they go out through the spider's web or anything like that, they're going to be forced to submerge because of aircraft flying over, and your 2 and 3 pack is broken up completely.
Yeah, you've got a point there. Yeah, no, fair enough. But yeah, so the Germans can't really adapt in World War One to the advent of British countermeasures because they are basically... Well, they're not hard-countered, but they try to adapt by going for the merchants after they break up from the convoys. In the Channel, and, Channel, North Sea, and the Irish Sea. But it's too little too late. And the British have pulled back enough that the danger zone has been removed. Anyone else got any other comments on that before we move on?
No, but I am surprised that you managed to avoid saying... you managed to say danger zone without making a song.
I am very, yes.
And that Foxo also didn't sing it, I'm thinking that, frankly, there was a point missed here.
No, we just have...
don't worry. Somebody put a GIF in.
No.
Fleet, do you want to go on a highway?
No, I don't want to go on a highway. I'm going to move on swiftly before I get forced into a pigeonhole. Knight 6831
danger zone again.
Knight 6831 from YouTube asks, if the Argentine land invasion was a failure, would the Argentine junta have tried air attacks on the British forces at the Falklands to try and make the islands surrender? No. If the Argentine land invasion for some reason fails, despite basically everything being in its favour, you've basically got the British pulling off a fait accompli. The Argentines will either say it was a mistake, an exercise went wrong, or they'll they'll say a commander went rogue. And the whole thing will be smothered over.
Actually, there is a way it could go wrong, because in a nicest way, if the Royal Marines on that detachment had been supplied with enough of the anti-tank weapons, they could have probably taken out all the landing craft coming in. As it
or if
is,
it had been
there
larger.
is a whole discussion of whether or not they did take out whether or not they did take out any, and how many they might have taken out, because there is, of course, some interesting discussion over the Argentinian landing vehicle, their what the U.S. Marine called them.
The LTA-V7As.
Yeah, exactly how many of those they had, and how many were lost due to maintenance issues, and how many might have been lost due to action. because the Royal Marines who were defending it claimed they destroyed at least 2 with their single anti-tank weapon they had and the few rounds of ammunition they had. But the Argentinians, of course, claimed they lost none.
Just do enough damage and the Argentinian assault will fail.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, basically, you take out the landing craft, they're gone.
And there will be no follow-ups. The Argentinians will basically will smudge it over.
They only had about 8 of those assault vehicles. So you have enough anti-tank weapons and enough rounds. You take them out while they're still in the water. Or you have a decent enough mortars. You know, that's the trouble. It was very much a light infantry section with very limited heavy weapons. Very, very limited. The Naval Party 8901 was a very limited, just a limited heavy weapons detachment. It was very much light weapons. Rifles and pistols and light machine guns. And they did their best. They did a really good job with that, with what their limited capabilities they had. But if they'd had, I don't know, a heavy weapons section, a properly formatted heavy weapons section attached to them of some heavy machine guns and some anti-tanks or mortars, the Argentine invasion could have been completely twaddled up.
Yeah.
Because the Argentines have such a limited ship-to-shore maneuver assets. And please note, this is not a critique of the Argentinians or saying they're not brave or anything like that. And it's not that. It's literally
basic practicality.
The ship-to-shore maneuver assets are so small in number that if you have a decent enough defense force, you take them out, they can't get to shore. Their ships can posture off the coast. Their troops can all look brave. They can bombard with their ships. They can launch air attack, but they can't physically get the troops to that. Their next course of action would probably be a parachute invasion, using airborne assault.
But that's ridiculously
But there's a reason
risky.
they didn't do that initially.
Yeah.
Because as anyone who's ever tried to parachute into the Falkland Islands will tell you, that ground is rocky as and you are going to lose more people to the rocks and the things you're going to land on, people who are going to break their necks, etc., when they come down, than you are to enemy action. In fact, there's a good argument that if you try an airborne assault on the Falklands, the correct defence force response is not to turn up with weapons, but to turn up with medics and go, come over here to the first aid tent, we'll arrest you after we've dealt with your issues.
Yeah. Question from YouTube. Discord. Darth Sidious asks, what would have been the consequences if Britain did leave the war in late 1917, early 1918? Central Powers victory.
Yeah.
France was on the verge of collapse. Russia had all...
keeps it going at the end of the war.
France was on the verge of
the
collapse.
Americans are coming in and getting warmed up, but without the Brits, that army, the Western Front collapses.
Yeah, and the other thing is, say the Brits bow out before the U.S. has had enough with the submarine attacks. The U.S. doesn't need to come in.
No.
Because they can just start trading with the Brits like normal. They can trade with the Germans like normal.
And though Wilson will be annoyed he doesn't get to dictate peace at the peace conference because he's not part of it, he'll still accept it.
I don't think he'll care too much.
No, he won't care enough. He won't care enough to do anything about it. Because as far as he's concerned, he's basically gotten the peace treaty he wanted. Not much has really changed on either side. Yeah, the French might lose some colonies and be punished harshly, but overall, it's not as big of a change to Europe as Germany being basically crippled as a nation state.
Where the change is going to happen on the Eastern Front.
Yeah. He's gotten what he wanted. He's gotten all the European powers weakened, damaged, all knocking at America's door for loans and trade. He's got his whole shining city on the hill he so desperately wanted. And he didn't even have to form a League of Nations.
That was a pitiful organization.
But in regards to what exactly happens, you're looking at the Germans carving up and nicking off with most of the grain in Eastern Europe, leading to famines over there to feed their own people. Even then, it still might not work. They'll have to buy in large amounts of grain from America to avoid the famine of 1918. Although it might be mitigated somewhat by not having to maintain such vast armies in the field. The French will basically collapse by June of 1918, and the Americans won't be coming to help them because the submarine campaign will stop the moment the British capitulate. And bear in mind, it won't be a capitulation. The British will go, ugh, fine, Germany, you get to be continental hegemon. Just leave us alone. And then they'll retreat into splendid isolation.
No,
No.
I can't.
No, it
I
wouldn't
can't
be
see
splendid
that.
isolation.
I suspect
When a
that is
continental power
it'll
starts to become a
be-
hegemon,
It'll be rapid rearmament. It'll
It's
be Napoleonic
prepare for- right.
Wars doctrine.
prepare for round 2.
Yeah. Napoleonic Wars 2 Electric Boogaloo, Prussian edition.
yeah.
It'll
Is
be a
what would
case of,
happen.
yeah, we lost round 1. And you have to remember, the Napoleonic Revolutionary Wars and the whole that sort of period,
No,
the
you
British
are right. Yep.
do lose some of those early wars. And basically, the problem with the British is they declare peace, but they go away, they prepare, they know war will come again. And the British, when they come back next time, your ideas for how's going to win, because you won last time, are probably going to have to change.
Yeah. On that
Because the British will come back, and next time it will be a very different anti-submarine warfare.
heavier British support to prop up White Russia as a potential ally for a second conflict, prevent the Reds from winning.
Probably not.
I'm
Or
not sure
alternatively
that's...
supporting the Reds.
They would be the
Yeah.
better people to support. Yeah.
Because it would keep the Germans very much focused on their eastern border rather than their western border.
And
The Whites... There were people arguing at the time that the Whites were a lost cause.
yeah,
Let's put it that way.
yeah,
It wasn't too wide of a view because they thought they could claw them back, but there were people arguing that at the time.
The moment a certain admiral died, they basically gave up because the Whites had lost their best commander.
honestly, I think I've just realised something. It would be the Germans and whatever. The Austrian Empire is already collapsing under its own weight as it is, so that's probably going to collapse under its own weight in 1918, even if the war ends. But it's going to be the Germans that are going to have a
Maybe?
vested interest in propping up a weak but controllable White Russian government, and possibly Kaiser Willy will want to save his cousin, the Tsar. The British will therefore probably have an interest in very clandestinely shipping older weapons that can't be traced back to them to Red Russian ports and saying, here you go, we're not using these, just, you know what, we've left them lying around, don't know what you want to do with them.
Yeah, there's just one issue I see without Germany doing White Russia. Germany's just inherited the revolutionary fire pit that is Poland and Eastern Europe.
Oh, Poland is, there will
And
be...
if Russia's been kicked out of Eastern Europe's going to be a hotbed of revolution.
Maybe.
Oh,
As
it's
it
going to be
was.
fun. I mean, literally, it's going to be death of 1,000 cuts for the German Empire.
Yeah.
They're going to
Yeah.
be so busy concentrating on their internal issues. It's going to be Napoleon all over again. So busy concentrating on their internal issues, they're going to not lose track of what the British are getting up to.
Yeah, I would
and there's
also-
going to be the whole thing of funding the high seas fleet is just going to disappear because you're going to need all that funding for the army. The Abwehr have always had far more funding and far more ability to get funding. You're going to need all that funding for them to be doing the policing of Europe
And-
of their empire.
Yeah, because you've basically got to set up puppet governments in the Baltics. Poland is slightly easier because one of the conditions for a large influx of manpower was the promise of a independent Polish state by the Germans. That will likely be honoured, even if it will be smaller than what we would recognise as post-Versailles Poland. There will still be some form of
A small
a
problem with
Polish
that
state.
fleet. That promise also included territory that Germans considered part of Germany, including
That
Poznan.
promise isn't happening.
Yeah, and once you get a lot of angry, betrayed Poles, it's not going to go well.
It's going to be certainly an interesting experience to watch from an outsider's perspective, and I'm sure the British government will be very kind and very helpful to those Polish people.
I would also like to cut off of something that I think people would be thinking would happen, because I'd like to suggest that it wouldn't, which was Italy won't lose much territory from this. They'll basically
Italy will lose nothing.
They'll dig in and say, "Hey, Austria, you're collapsing. How about we sign? I just get off scot-free, and we go back to like nothing ever happened. All right, good."
Oh, there's renouncing any claims to their contested territories.
They might do that.
First.
They might do that, and then immediately renege on that as soon as the war's over.
Immediately renege? I mean, literally, the question will be whether they actually even are reneging while inking the document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, that document would not be worth the paper it was written on.
No. The Austrian, you're probably looking at an Austria that doesn't balkanize, but it loses Hungary to some form of quasi-independent or fully independent state. It loses the southern parts of its empire to some form of breakaway state that either integrates into Serbia or works closely with Serbia, but you're still looking at an Austria that maintains sovereign control over Croatia, some parts of Slovenia, possibly bits of Bohemia, but maybe not.
No.
Fleet, I think you're dramatically underestimating the inherent issues in the Austro-Hungarian Empire that caused it to break.
Yeah,
It was
'cause-
less the peace of the war rather than war being the
You might
water
actually
that
get
freezes
Anschluss
in the
with the remainder
cracks.
of Austria joining Germany. You might actually get Anschluss early, and the empire completely break up.
Because the Czechs have a very strong nationalist movement before the war.
Honestly,
The Croatians do, and the Bosnians do. The only one that's not actively on fire is the Hungarians of our people, but they're more focused on keeping Greater Hungary within the empire.
yeah, honestly, if there is an Anschluss, you're going to look at the Habsburgs ruling some form of Greater Hungarian kingdom. As like
No, Greater Hungary's going bang.
No.
I do not
No.
underestimate the Hungarians' capabilities to commit genocide to keep the thing together.
I mean, fair, but Hungary's going bang because the Slovaks want out, the Romanians in
Hungary
Transylvania want
themselves
out,
is,
Croatia wants out, the Germans in Banat want out. The
And the
wants
moment
to
you
stay
crack on one group, the other groups are all going to explode on you. That's the problem.
Yeah,
And you can't crack on all of them at once.
it's part of the reason the earlier, I think it's a Hungarian Revolution in the 1870s fails. It's Hungarian nationalism, not.
Oh, you're thinking of the during the Springtime of Nations. It's the one that it's the one that the Austrians had to get Russian help to put down.
Yeah. Because that
That was a
turns.
good sign. If you have to get the Russian army to come help you put something down.
Yeah. That was one of the few times you sort of had pan-nationalism in Greater Hungary. But there's arguments that was because you had a bunch of nationalist movements working together
Yeah.
that all hated the Austrians.
Yeah,
And would have turned on each other if Hungary became independent.
Yeah, you've all got. So basically, Austria-Hungary just collapses into nation states, with Germany probably scooping up the German bit. Which, hooray! Balkan's power vacuum. Whoopee! This can only end well for everyone involved.
It probably will end up better for everyone involved, though. Because you don't have the catastrophe that's Yugoslavia.
No, there will be a Yugoslavia, because the Serbs will literally come in with rifles and say, this is happening.
Yeah,
Because that's what
but
Serbs do.
I wouldn't say a place like Croatia.
No, you probably
With-
don't have it, because whilst the Serbs might want to do that, you're going to be dealing with lots of little different nation states with lots of different interesting alliances. So instead of it being within one state and one logistics force where basically the Serbs provided the vast majority of the military capability, especially this professional military capability of Yugoslavia, and so were spread around and were able to concentrate the resources for the military power within Serbia. You'd have them all have their own capabilities, so it would end up being constant, nasty border conflicts.
Yeah, and you sort of don't have the rally around the flag effect of where the defenders of the South Slavs that Serbia got from winning be on the winning side of the wall.
True. And
Because Serbia got its ass kicked,
And
but it got its ass kicked for the Slavs.
Yeah, and honestly, what I would say is that Italy might actually be somewhat happy to give up, like without seemingly getting anything, because they can probably see the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsing, and are basically just waiting to swoop in and take their claims from these new nation states without nearly half the trouble they had fighting the Austrians for them.
Yeah.
And
Would they though?
yes, the Italians will
Yes.
absolutely do that. It's not even. It's not even.
Because a big thing's Dalmatia for them, isn't it?
Dalmatia,
Yes.
South Tyrol, although Tyrol will probably go to Germany as a whole, and you're looking at Istria, all that good stuff. The real question for me though is who gets what from the Austro-Hungarian fleet as the empire fractures.
Croatia.
Croatia's not.
They're the ones who gets the ports.
Yes, but Croatia can't afford to operate the Tegetovs or even the Radetskis. Never mind the escorts that come with them.
But they just sit there because Croatians have all the ports. Because I'm gonna guess, is it Trieste, the Italian enclave that they got, isn't gonna, and Zara ain't gonna happen because they lost the war.
Possibly.
So it's gonna go to Croatia, then it's gonna rot because Croatia can't do anything with it.
There's a possibility.
It's basically like giving ships to Canada prior to World War II.
Yeah, it's possible.
They're going to have these really cool ships. They're going to rot to pieces from the inside out.
Yeah, it's possible the Germans, during the whole Anschluss breakup of the Empire, may attempt to nick off with the Tegetovs. But whether or
Why
not that...
though?
Because
A, would the crew want to do that, and B...
Well, first of all, those are 4 dreadnought battleships. Germany's looking at a potential future war with Britain, and there are 4 dreadnought battleships right there.
But would Germany be looking at the future war with Britain at this point?
Yeah.
Britain's looking at a future war with Germany. Germany's going to be concentrating on policing its empire. At this point, it has to.
And also, if this is the case,
there are also ships not designed for the high seas fleet's operational environment fleet.
True. Italy?
And keep in mind, the Germans are going to be sitting there probably going, okay, we're going to put a pause on expansion and we're going to focus on modernization. Because remember, they still have a bunch of pre-dreadnoughts they need to replace.
Yeah, good point.
Would they put a full hold on expansion to go full modernization?
By fully modernizing their fleet, they will...
They don't really have the infrastructure to do both at the same time at this point.
They have to, at this point, go back and replace the pre-dreads and the early dreads that they have.
Everything.
They don't have the luxury to sit around.
No, everything.
They have to modernize.
Everything before the Bayerns for battleships and the Deflingers for battlecruisers basically has to go. And even the Deflingers are iffy as whether they stay or not.
I'm not going to say everything in battleships before the Bayerns, because they're going to have to keep a good chunk of those around. Because they're relatively modern.
But the Koenigs probably will at least work well enough.
They're not going to be happy with them, but they don't have a choice. And the reason why is they have so many older ships that are just not viable at all. Obsolescent, even obsolete, is better than floating target.
And yeah, I mean, Dr. Clark has a good point there. You can use the older ships in the Baltic facing whatever form of a Russian fleet appears after the Russian Civil War calms down. / a victory.
And you also have to remember that a large fleet at this point with significant amounts of dreadnoughts is the status symbol of all status symbols.
Yes, it is, but naval men also understand that the dreadnoughts have to actually be worth something to matter.
But But to a newspaper or someone who lives in, I don't know, Dresden, who's never seen the sea, who just likes a number of battleships versus the British, or number of battleships versus the French, or number of battleships versus the Americans, are they going to care that they're not the most modern, up-to-date battleships? When they can
No,
just
let's
claim,
be honest.
"Oh,
Do you look at the amount of conversations you have? People go, "Oh, the Chinese Navy now has a greater tonnage of ships than the U.S. Navy," and you go,
Well, greater
"Have
number.
you looked at what
not
those
tonnage.
that tonnage is made up of?"
It's not even tonnage. It's just raw numbers of boats.
Yeah,
And
and most of those boats
yeah.
are very small.
O-56
Very,
Corvettes are smaller that don't even hold up well compared to an LCS.
Good lord.
That's a bit cruel. It's accurate, but it's still cruel.
It's very accurate.
But it's still cruel.
I don't care. It's war.
Saying something doesn't
there's
even
a
hold up
reason
versus
they
an
have
LCS.
to-
That's just nasty.
There's a reason they have to detach 052 Cs and Ds to tail LCSs in the South China Sea. Because they need something with the defensive capability to have a how do I put this? A chance in hell of engaging naval strike missile.
Oh dear.
They also need something that's capable of a high-speed cruise. The O-56 and their frigates really aren't.
Yeah.
Their
It's
frigates
still
are also
cruel
all
to say
90s era armed with VL Book.
Ooh. That's an ouch.
And not modern radars.
Oh. So, well, there you are.
I think you're having too much fun describing this now.
Yeah,
I
he
think
is.
you really are.
He
Can
is.
I very quickly answer a question from Gunnery Officer that I see in chat?
Yep, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then I've got to go over to YouTube and answer Knight's next question.
Gunnery Officer, it's because it was supposed to be an interim air defense system that became temporarily permanent. There's your answer.
From YouTube, Knight6831 asks if the Brits built 549 Avro York C1s for the RAF, 60 Avro York Mark IIIs for BOAC, and 50 Avro York C3s for the RAF with the 1650 horsepower Bristol Hercules 6. How might that change British transport aircraft design? It doesn't. You've just got more Avro Yorks with better engines. It's not a major deal. I mean, I'm questioning whether British are getting the money for all of this at the
this
post-war
point, if you've
period.
got that much transport capacity, are you maintaining a full parachute division into that period?
Yeah, it's like what
That's
are
the
these,
only thing that can justify that much money being spent.
what are these Yorks doing? It's like, and also, I'm sorry,
It's like-
the Afro York's not even that good. It's really not. It's a post-war transport aircraft. It's not
you've
even
got
that good.
No.
the ability to transport an
It's
entire
useful.
division of paratroopers.
introduced in 1944 fleet, it's not even post-war.
I know. It's just a Lancaster that someone said, let's turn into a transport aircraft. It's
I was
basically
about to
what
say,
it
I'm
is.
going to have to quickly check which one the Avro York even is there for a second.
I mean, it will
At that
enable
point,
it will enable BOAC to phase out some of their flying boats quicker.
That is an interesting hull design.
Yeah. So the Yorks will enable BOAC to phase out flying boats on some of its Empire routes much, much faster.
That's about their limit.
Yeah, but that's basically it. It's not changing much. It's not... Even with a better engine that can lift more, the fuselage is fundamentally limited for a post-war... for what it can do as a post-war transport aircraft.
Yeah.
Basically,
By looks
a cute idea, but no.
by looks at it was its small size comparison for a four-engine transport aircraft that was its issue, not
Yeah.
the end.
Akazuki asks, actually, hang on a second, how come Germany got punished hard when they didn't start World War One? They lost, and they were the main party, and they were the main combatant for the Central Powers. And I would also point out that it was Germany's blank check to Austria that precipitated the move into open conflict.
Yeah,
And
and,
the
a
Ge-
part
and-
of the reason Germany.
And the Germans wanted the war. They wanted the war
Yeah.
in 1914.
And it wasn't the Serbians who started using chemical weapons first. It wasn't the Austrians. Versailles was almost defined by the Western Front. And I mean,
Let alone including flamethrowers and other things. The Western nations had a lot of reasons to dislike the Germans.
and the Germans didn't start World War One. Technically, they turned World War One into World War One.
Yeah.
The Germans had a few issues when it comes to World War One.
Yeah. So that was a year.
We're gonna say just a
yeah.
few issues to be nice, but they do have a few issues.
Oh.
Well, that is
here's
chemical warfare.
Here's one I'm glad.
May it never return.
Yeah. Here is one I'm very glad that Cyclic is here, because he'll be able to answer this far better than I ever could. Knight6831 from YouTube asks, would a Grumman A6F Intruder 2 base tanker with 8,400 litres of fuel from 7 1,200 litre external fuel tanks have been a better tanker than an F-18 tanker?
Well, it would have been a better tanker by dint of being a KCA-6F. Or I should say a KA-6F. And that being its job. Simply put. I think where the real answer to that is what does having a KA-6F mean? It means you have the A6F in your air wing during GWAT, which is much, much, much better situated to drilling holes in the sky, flying donuts at subsonic cruise than a Super Hornet. Don't get me wrong, the Super Hornets did the job. Same with the Legacy Hornets. But they're designed for a different mission. They could do a lot of the attack role, but just sitting there with a couple 2,000-pound bombs, a laser Maverick, and then some 500-pound bombs is right up in A6's alley. I think it was a mistake to cancel the A6F.
Yes.
But at the same time, I do also understand why it was done. The Navy was really short on money. They wanted to prioritize a couple other programs, but I would still argue it was a mistake. But I can understand why they chose what they did. Just like I can understand why the Air Force canceling the F-22. And on that case, I would actually say it was the correct decision, because without that, the program that would lead to B-21 would be gone. But, which you don't compromise strategic deterrence.
But I would say on the 22, what's really interesting is the amount of efforts being put into that now again, because the whole idea was predicated in this is the trouble was the funding battle at the time was predicated on the fact that there was never going to be
And the
trouble is, it's the problem of dealing with a near-peer conflict. And this is the point. A near-peer conflict can stretch your resources just as much as a peer conflict. And that's the trouble. When people focus on there's not going to be another peer conflict because we're so far ahead, they get a false sense of metric. And I'd say the real lesson of the Falklands War would have been what a near-peer conflict can do to you. Because the Argentinians were not at the peer of the British forces in the strength and capabilities and technological range of the British forces. They just weren't. The British were one of the few, and still are one of the few forces which can project power globally. But they are a near enough peer, they cause enough issues. And that's the point. we have this hubris of you're a peer or you're beneath us, and you're not. Near peers are a very real threat and a very real capability you have to
particularly
think
in
about.
their regions.
Mm.
When you
And
have to project into.
And that's the problem, and that's where and the trouble is that's the thing. If you concentrate just on, oh, there's no longer a peer threat to us, well, there isn't. But you might have to deal with these near peer threats, and if you have to go into their regions, the trouble is a near peer threat in their region is probably actually a peer threat in their region, because it's where all their infrastructure and industry is, and you have to deal with that, because they're going to have their logistics, they're going to have their forces there.
Okay, slightly political question, but how much of damage did the war on terror do to this sort of system then? Where America
Let me put it to you this way. Let me put it to you this way. The entire understanding of, I'll use a current real world example right now, the Russia-Ukrainian war. The U.S. pre-GWAT would have handled this completely differently. The entire geostrategic thinking of the U.S., like, that knowledge was just not passed on. The U.S. is having to relearn how to compete in these sorts of areas and manage escalation in these sorts of areas. And because of that, you're seeing I'll get into the conventional side of, like, the actual conflict side of this in a minute, but
can I quickly before you do, what is GWAT?
Yeah.
For those that in
Global War on Terror.
Right. Thank you.
The fun adventures in the Middle East and near
Other parts of the world, which are equally fun and hot and humid.
But so the U.S. right now, I would argue, and many others, including people who, even the current vice president's national security advisor, by the way, would argue we are being way too cautious. And the simple fact of the matter is, when you get down to it right now, what are the Russians going to do?
Nothing. Nothing.
Practically speaking, the U.S. has the Russians absolutely in an escalation trap on the nuclear side of things. You'll notice every time the Russians try to beat their chest, one fist hits their chest, they don't even get the second one in before a ballistic missile submarine surfaces in a very, very awkward position for them. The last one was like up near northern Norway. Surfaced there with the Navy orders issuing aircraft in the same video shot as it.
Cyclic, let me guess. From that distance, it's basically minutes to Moscow time if it launches.
That's not there for Moscow. That's there for the Russian SSBN docks. The Russians tend to keep their subs loaded because they can fire from the pier.
Right.
But if you have a sub up in that area, and that's your opening shot, part of your opening salvo, there is a very, very, very good chance the Russians don't get missiles off from there. Because the orders won't get there in time. The Russian order system is far more convoluted than the U.S. The U.S. is much better positioned to conduct a under-the-guns launch.
Yeah.
In that case, forgive if we're wrong, but isn't Russia's main strategic deterrence its road and mobile nuclear missile launch capabilities?
No. Not
to an extent, fleet, that's incorrect.
Is it?
So, to an extent, yes. However, when you look at Russian thought, they view their missile submarines as their war-ending capability. Their enforcement of peace option. And from the U.S. perspective, it's a lot easier to hit those when they're all at the pier, right? than it is to have to go out and try to hunt them down at sea. Because you may have some submarines up there.
There's probably an
You don't have
SPN
enough.
far even closer with Talams.
Yeah.
Okay.
Around that submarine. The SSBN sitting off Norway is a lovely threat, but long before it gets nuclear, they're going to have Talams raining down on them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Now, what I
so-
will say, and the reason... Hang on a second. I just had something crawl on my drink. I need to call the exterminator. Fun times. The reason that the U.S. is doing this with an SSBN in this case is because the U.S. has publicly not stated this, but reportedly privately made it very, 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 very clear to the Kremlin that Ukraine is effectively under the U.S. nuclear umbrella right now.
Oh, dear. They're not happy with that.
The Russians would consider themselves lucky if a nuclear weapon went off in Ukraine. They would be able to consider themselves lucky if we decided to keep it conventional. And that even in that case, if they then tried to raise their nuclear alert level, we would probably just remove the problem.
Oh, good God.
Because we're already sitting postured at our lowest level right now.
Really?
Right?
I thought
No, we're not at our lowest level, but at the US's lowest level, the US maintains the capability to get a devastating first strike off in terms of how nuclear warfare is fought.
Okay, so just a quick thing to clarify. So, Russia's doctrine is that the ballistic missile submarines are the counter force units.
No,
And
they're
the
conflict
nuclear weapons will be
resolution.
counter value.
No, they're conflict
So
resolution.
separate this from counter force or counter value here. This is and separate operations and tactics from strategic for a minute.
Okay.
This is at the national policy level and strategy for having an exit strategy to a conflict, whether that's conventional or nuclear. This is the Russians' way of going, that's enough. Ceasefire now. That's how the Russians think about their SSBNs. That's not how they would 100% get used if nukes are already flying, right? That is how they view this thing from a strategic policy perspective. That's how their Navy views them. That's why they are so important, because the Navy is the war termination method for the Russians. It's something that has retained this way since the Soviets.
It's what
in the 80s.
It's what the Northern Fleet's whole purpose is. It's to
Is
protect
to
the
preserve
bastard.
that war termination effort.
Like, get the boats into a bastion, or bastions plural, and defend that bastion. Nothing in.
Now, how capable they are going to be at that depends on where they put the boats, but particularly today, though they do have some potentially spicy options for that. But all that aside, the U.S. has the Russians in an escalation trap. They can't attempt to raise their alert level, which they would need to do. They would need to release warheads to platforms. They would need to move transporter erector launchers out from their sheds and their bases. They would need to disperse.
And they
And
need to
if
check
the-
the tires on those transporter erector launchers.
So they have a lot to do before they can use those. Some of their land-based silos sit at constant alert, not all of them.
So, the ballistic missile submarines are the sit down, I've got the talking stick, because they're the only one they can use on
It's the
a
only-
quick, like a rapid response.
Let Foxo finish
Sorry.
and I'll answer.
Sorry.
No.
It's the one they can bring to bear.
They're considered the most survivable. So that's why they are the war termination.
Can they?
Their role at lower readiness levels is to be, because they can fire from pier and still hit continental US. Their role at lower readiness levels is to be the bulk of the turnkey, like the oh crap, we need to get missiles in the air now.
Right.
And so when you're able to threaten them, say with depressed trajectory tridents out of an Ohio-class SSBN that would utterly eviscerate the Northern Fleet's boomers, and just by showing that hand in the Atlantic means the Russians automatically assume there's another SSBN positioned in the Pacific for that. And there almost certainly is. So
Monaco Zievo has got some weapons primed and ready for it, just in case. Which is the Pac Fleet's sub-base.
So that's the nuclear escalation trap. So the Russians don't have that card, because that card is going to get knocked out of their hand very quickly before they can do much of anything. The conventional card, I don't even think I need to state. What would happen if the US gets involved in this war conventionally, even without sending ground troops? Just having the US Air Force show up, flying out of Poland, for example. What that would do for the Russians in this war? Because a huge part of Ukraine's problems just stem from the fact that they would never be able to establish their superiority.
The US forces might not show up. The US ground forces might not show up. Sorry to speak. But with the current mood of the Polish armed forces, if you give them
the Russians might lose Kaliningrad.
They might lose Moscow.
Yeah. Although the Poles are kind of light on heavy weapons at the moment. But
yes,
they
make
enough.
up for that in so many other ways.
Yes.
More blood for the meat grinder. At least.
Not necessarily even for the meat grinder, because, like, the Russians don't have troops on the other side of Belarus, and I'm sorry, the Belarusian armed forces are a joke.
And that's also, you also have the joy of, if the Finns are also part of NATO now. So and there's the Baltic states who all have territory they would quite like to regain.
Wait, what was the original question? Because I forgot what the point was I was trying to make. Oh, right. It was a question from Foxo about the U.S. losing, like, mojo. So the U.S. a lot of U.S. leaders and actually, let me use policymakers instead of leaders here. Don't know how to tread this sort of situation. And so, understandably, they're being very cautious. When they don't need to be, and they're in a situation where being cautious actually emboldens the Kremlin and makes the war worse. And not just by Ukraine being weaker, but physically emboldens the Kremlin, makes the Kremlin think they can outlast Western political will, makes them think they can win a war of attrition, right? Because Ukraine's only gotten, say, 200 Bradleys and 31 Abrams, when the U.S. can give a lot more than that. And the U.S. can certainly give a lot more than 900 M113s. Right? In M113s alone, the U.S. has enough sitting around that it can rapidly bring back into serviceable capability to outfit the entire Ukrainian army. Thanks to our Cold War stocks of them that we just don't use anymore.
So, essentially, the Americans have gotten into the paradigm of the war on terror, and they're sort of not kept the institutional knowledge around for this sort of, I don't want to say proxy war, but
We've forgotten how to play big boy geopolitics.
yeah, sort of
I'd say one of the problems is that quite a lot of, and this has happened in the UK as well, quite a lot of the political science and international relations departments now no longer talk with history departments in terms of academia. And a lot of policymakers do come from an academic background because you usually have to be steeped in knowledge. And one of the few places in the world where you're going to be paid to sit and read and research things is academia. But the trouble is, if your IR departments and your political science departments and your history departments, rather than talking with each other and exchanging information, are continually trying to compete for the same amount of students and the same funding and not talking and working with each other, you end up with a situation where you're not getting a properly balanced approach. This is one of the reasons why King's College London's War Studies Department, which specifically combines all three, does as well as it does for the UK. And why, when you start to look at people supplying certain levels of knowledge in the UK, and that's one of the few reasons why UK has actually done quite well in some of its strategic appraisals, is because of the number of war studies departments it has, which actually specifically do combine all three. But you try and find equivalent departments in the United States, where the funding rules and the organization is just different enough to make such an organization very difficult to bring about. Because everyone's going to argue over which department it should belong to.
The other thing here, and I'm not going to mention which institution this is, but I have heard some very interesting reactions to Admiral Franchetti's instructions to the fleet. Admiral Franchetti takes it from the perspective that we are no longer in peacetime; we are in a pre-war era. Which, side note, is something that is said a lot on the British side of the Atlantic. And her instructions are all about preparing to, quote, kill the Chinese Navy.
Cast cease
I have heard stories. And by the way, this matches what's out in the numbered fleets, and has been the attitude in the numbered fleets for a while. There might be a reason for that. She may have headed a numbered fleet before she became CNO, funnily enough. But the reactions I've heard, and it's across more than one institution, but this particular one, and again, I'm not naming it, is kind of surprising that this institution is reacting that way. A lot of the instructors on the policy side are really, really perturbed and worried about it and scared by it, because they look at it as a wartime document, because it is. And they view that as very problematic, very escalatory, very inflammatory, right? Which, I mean, my immediate counter to that is, if you think this is inflammatory, you should see what they're writing about us.
That is also
like when you
is the problem.
When you go and you look at the plans documents, like, they have one mission in a conflict in the Western Pacific, and that's kill anything that comes west. They're very clear about it. Because they can't go after Taiwan until they have neutralized 7th and 3rd Fleet, which is a heck of a task.
It's a big ask.
But they're clear about it, right? They're not dancing around the bush. They know their objectives are what they are, and they're direct about it. And that's what Franchetti is going to be. Your objective is to destroy the Chinese Navy and attrit the Chinese Air Force. Like, that's your objective. Now, it's not in that order or any particular order per se, but that should not be viewed in a policy community as inflammatory, because it's not. Yes, you're saying the quiet part out loud, but that quiet part shouldn't be quiet. It's a navy. It's a war-fighting organization.
That's the quiet part for diplomats. It's the quiet part for politicians. It's not the quiet part for the Navy. This was the whole thing. Jackie Fisher, one good thing he was very good at understanding what the Navy needs to be signaling versus the government. The Navy needs to be the firm, scary thing that the government's going, look, you want to deal with us. You want to deal with us for diplomacy. Because if you don't, we have to let that thing off the leash. And he's a rabid dog. What will he do to you? So you really need to talk to us, because that thing will take you apart. He's talking about doing all sorts of nasty things to you. Now, we can control him as long as it's peacetime. But so you want to talk with us. You want to talk with us, because otherwise we let him off the leash. And that's the point. When you're the major power, that's what your armed forces need to look like. In this sort of scenario. They need to look like they literally do eat nails for breakfast, smoke enemy shoes, and are prepared to literally rip people to pieces with their bare hands just because they look at them funny. That's what your armed forces is rejecting the idea of.
All this from a question about the Grumman A6F Intruder 2.
No.
That's how we got
things
here.
Are interrelated.
That's how we got here. Ramblings at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. But can we
question then? So
Foxo, I'll let you ask one more question, but I need to put a pin in this and move on. I have to get through a reasonable amount of questions.
Yeah. So if they're related to this, so would you say that the navies themselves have been infested by millenarianism and the idea that it's the end of history, we won't be fighting wars like this anymore?
I would say for the U.S. Navy, probably not, to an extent. And the reason I would say that is when you go back and you look through Navy policy documents, all the way back to like 2001, 2002, they are talking about how the Chinese are going to be the next big naval problem, and how we need to start structuring our Navy to deal with it. Now, unfortunately, DoD gets a say in that. We don't have a true separate department of the Navy anymore. I think we'd be better off if we did, to an extent. There's some other areas where we may have problems from that, but and that led down a different route. But the Navy's, like, the whole reason the Zumwalts were truncated was the Chinese. I personally think that was a little bit of a mistake, A, because it kind of killed Bath, but B, the Zumwalts are something you could retrofit or go, okay, maybe we complete Flight 1 out here and a Flight 2 is a different design, designed more for
and
heavy.
let's be honest, Zumwalts would have been are pretty good as stylish ships to go and be present ships. And this is again part of the whole problem of not thinking about the whole role of war navies in this sort of pre-war period. If you want to shape things, you need a big, scary, independent ship you can send around that's going to look scary and menacing when it turns up.
And if you need to dial up the pressure,
and as much as I love the Arleigh Burke, it is scary in capabilities. I admit that, but
it's a fleet escort, and it looks like it.
When you're looking at it and you don't know what ship is, you don't really know the capabilities of the ships. The Zumwalt looks mean as anything.
Yeah, and that's with or without the guns. The way her lines are. But here's the other thing: the Zumwalts,
they look menacing.
They're excellent surface action group leaders.
Yeah.
So you want to dial up the pressure more. You send her with 2 Burks. Because then you're sending this big, mean-looking ship with 2 escorts that everybody already knows mean business as escorts.
James, you were going to say
it's like sending a town and 2 tribals.
Yeah,
that is a scary.
You want to do this? You really want to do this game? It's
James?
closer to a town and to our refusers, actually, let's be honest. It's a case
Probably,
of, you really want to play this game?
James, you had something you were going to say quickly?
Yeah, I would have actually said that Zomwalt's actually not that scary. And the reason being is because it's just a multitude of like little tiny angulated shapes. If you want to go for the real scare factor, go and fucking get a Kirov. Because if you see that thing coming over the flipping horizon, you will go in a flipping run.
It has the same effect for the
but
Russians.
that's not really an option for the US Navy to build.
No, yeah, like
That is true.
It's the option for the Russians, and also it's about perception
I'd also
rather
say
than
it's
reality.
not a great fighting warship at all.
No, but if you want proper scare factor, that thing.
Yeah, the
So-
Kirov can just launch missiles the size of some buses, but we'll leave that to one side.
As well.
I'm under missile attack by a Kirov. Oh, good. So, did you take a bus hit, or was it a small car?
I cast Lauder!
Well, I mean, so if we're talking about right now, I'm under attack by Kirov. Oh, hey,
Yeah.
just flip the electronic warfare system on, we'll be fine. Because that's how bad the Seeker is on the Granite now.
Yeah.
Christ, that's sad. Well, it's not sad, it's great for us, but that's sad.
It's same thing with half the world's exoset inventory. Because it's that era of conically scanned radar Seeker. That's just how they are. Yeah, if it's not a more modern digital harpoon, then yeah. And the most modern exosets. I actually think a good chunk of the C803s got better Seekers before the mainline exoset did, which is hilarious. But
Yeah, but there's problems with the C803's Seekers. They have problems with the lens, don't they?
I think it depends on which version you're looking at, and whose.
I thought there was a quality control issue with their lens on their Seeker head.
I know there was for a time. I believe that's not been carried through. But I don't have the greatest vision into that. The thing with the Zumwalt is when it shows up in terms of a US combatant, there's two things that outdo it. That's a big deck amphib for the US meaning business. It's a big deck amphib or a carrier. But this can go a lot more places. You can get a Zumwalt into harbors you can't get a Burke into. It's got a shallower draft than a Burke. You can go around, show the flag, do everything. And it's this big, imposing ship when it's in port. They're 16,000 tons full load. And they're huge. It's the same length as a Nagato.
So, out of curiosity, there is still the role of this ship looks scary, even if it's not the scariest in actual naval combat. Just sort of transmitting to
very scary naval combat.
Transmitting to a civilian or someone who's not familiar with naval warfare, that this ship is scary, even if it's not the technically the scariest ship on the sea.
It's one of those things. The angled shapes of the Zumwalt do look scary.
I mean, when you look at the bridge, it's a face that looks angry.
It also does have
Albeit a
the
monobrow.
added factor of being ugly.
Yeah, that does. It does. That is an advantage sometimes in ship design. It looks just strange enough that you go, it's got to be this strange for a reason.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's that ugly.
Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm going to be sorry and I'm going to leave you all now, but I'm going to go off and take my meds. And I've probably reached about the point at which I can't control coughing for any longer, because I can do roughly about an hour of sporadic coughing and talking before I suddenly have a massive coughing fit at the moment.
Right.
Take care of yourself.
I'm going to apologise for going now, but I did want to pop in and check in on everyone. And yeah, there's going to be roughly 2 videos on my channel hopefully this week.
Hey,
I'm hopefully going to
Hey.
get the Japanese naval aviation one done,
fantastic.
and the first day they're going to be premieres, not lives. I do apologize. They are going to be Patreon premieres rather than lives,
Makes sense.
because me at the moment, my normal lives are roughly 3 hours long. I don't think I can do that at the moment.
No, makes sense. You take care of yourself,
So
Dr.
we can't
Clark.
listen to Voltron
Okay.
grinding for a bit.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
As usual, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Right, so...
All right, so-
Probably want to
back
start
to-
moving on, Fleet.
Back to my point on the zoom waltz real quick.
yeah, can we have that be the... Because I was meant to wrap this up a while ago.
While I disagree with them being truncated, I do understand the U.S. Navy's position. They wanted to rapidly get more Burks. The Chinese were going to be an air and missile threat long before they were a major submarine threat. And that's what made the zoom waltz so freaking expensive. Was their ASW prowess. They are Spruance class destroyer replacements. They are strike and ASW first. Even with the 2 AGS systems on them, but they are ASW first. They are very quiet ships that's very expensive, and the Chinese submarine threat, even today, is still primarily coastal and inside the first island chain, which is not really that big of a U.S. concern because of how, when you look at the western side of the first island chain, the water gets very deep very, very quickly. And once you're out there as an SSK, you are a very small fish in a very big pond with very, very mean predatory fish and very mean, very hungry birds. Like, you are in a nasty spot as an SSK or SSP. You are food.
Okay. What's an SSP?
That's just air independent. So that's the ones with those like fancy Stirling engines to recharge their batteries. It's air independent power. A lot of people call it air independent propulsion, but those engines don't actually propel the submarine. They just exist to recharge or trickle charge the batteries. So
Okay, so
yeah.
they're SSKs in roll, essentially.
Yeah, they just have different propulsion that gives them some advantages. Although with the way battery technology is going, there's a reason that several nations are no longer looking at SSPs. And they're back to traditional SSKs.
Yeah.
It depends on what you're trying to do.
Right. Okay. Can
Well,
I...
We're having fleet insane.
Let's go back
Right.
to the
No, no,
questions.
yeah. The reason I say this is we're on of the Discord questions. We're on question. We've just finished question 2 of 23.
Brackman asks, what would happen if the assassination of Franz Ferdinand failed at Sarajevo? It's hard to say.
There's also
There's
an addendum to that question, which came later.
What was the addendum?
In addition, what ships would be built by Germany, Austria-Hungary, Great Britain, and France? I believe same as normal. Basically.
So I assume that if that's the addendum, he wants the question to run World War One doesn't start at that point. So
I'm guessing that's what it basically.
If World War One doesn't start, the build programs we will see. What I can answer really easily, because what is confirmed we'll see all the R's, full build out of the R class. We'll see the Mackinsons. We'll see the all 4 Bayerns, probably not built in 2 half classes, just built as a class of 4. We'll see the Ersatz Monarchs, which will be the Austrians' entry into the Super Dreadnought game. We'll see the Francesco Caracuelos. We'll see the Ismails for the Russians. Japan, we already know what they're going to build, and we also know what the Americans are going to build, because they weren't really in a major war, so their shipbuilding programs continued. But beyond that point, it's pure conjecture. Akazuki asks, what if Germany was allowed to keep their navy after World War One? Well, first of all, obvious answer to obvious question, they wouldn't. The British have literally just fought a war to get rid of the damn thing. But if
They
they
go to scrapyard anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if they did, the Germans can't afford to maintain them or even keep them in mothballs. They don't have the crew.
Yeah.
The High Seas Fleet will basically get rid of itself.
Germany in 1919 and 1920 is doing its best impression of Great Depression America.
And that's,
Economy-wise?
before
Not even. No, it's more the other way around with how bad it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, hello, Phoenix. I hear you're in. I see you're in text. I don't know if you're able to join or not.
Yeet. Extends hand.
I don't know if he'll be able to join, but
This will probably be an on and off thing. We'll see.
We'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's basically it. Where are we? So that's a Discord question. Now it's time for one of the Knight's YouTube questions. If the CAC CA15, which I've looked up, is basically the Australian Super Mustang they were going to build domestically but cancelled because jet aircraft exist, how useful would it have been? As it had a range of 1,150 miles, to be honest, it sounds as it was built with the Pacific War in mind. The only reason it's built is as a super prop to tide the Australian Air Force over until it gets jets. That's basically it. You get perhaps a squadron or two just to tide the Australian Air Force over until it gets jets. It'll be like the history books will write of it. Basically, it was a interesting footnote, and Australia should be proud of the super prop they built. But that's basically it. It'll be phased out and replaced with probably Gloucester Meteors or Vampires or Venoms.
It's quite literally going to be full prop aircraft. Now, can we please buy those Gloucester Meteor F8s?
Yeah.
We really want the F8s.
Or if it's
please give us the F8s.
Or if it's Australia, they could buy American if there's a delay.
No, yeah, but they bought the F8.
Yeah, but
they really wanted the F8.
Fair enough. Your typical gunnery officer asks, why was the XM8 or CCVL light tank program failed? Does he mean cancelled or failed? Why did they?
Yeah, I think you mean why did it? I think it means why did it fail?
Yeah. Why did they use the chassis to install ADATs or a light SPG?
I can answer this. One, because the U.S. is not interested in light SPGs. That went out the window with the 105 precursor to Paladin that died because it doesn't make sense from the U.S. artillery perspective. But the reason the M8, despite being officially type classified, selected from the CCVL program, the reason that died is it's the 1990s. We don't really see the need for it. It's a marginal cost or marginal capability for a whole lot of cost to outfit the 82nd with that capability.
Yeah.
And it's not as, and because it's such a small community, it's going to be very expensive for what it gets you. And you're not getting a lot. It's not like the current M10 Booker, where that's not just going to the 82nd. That's going to go to every single infantry division, like light infantry division. The template that the Army's currently running with for those units holds a battalion of the things at the division level to provide direct fire support to the infantry. It's not a battalion designed to fight as a battalion. It's designed to fight as several companies doled out to support each brigade. But we'll see how long that lasts, because there may be division commanders that want to concentrate. But it's that's going out to like a third to half, depending on how the National Guard and reserves get changed, particularly the National Guard. It's one of the biggest questions out there about the reorg. But and obviously it is still very much in flux as the U.S. Army is learning from observing the Ukraine war and what applies and what does not apply. to us, but it's a much larger program, so your maintenance costs, your spares costs, your training program, right, is a lot more economical for in terms like for the capability that you get across the army for it. And you know, M8 just didn't do that because it was only going to a select few units. And when you look at that, and it's the 1990s, and you're downsizing, and you're trying to preserve other capabilities, well, it's not going to solve the problem we had in Desert Storm, where the 82nd would have been a speed bump to a large mechanized force that came after them. It wouldn't have solved that problem at all. So get rid of it. Save the money. Put that money somewhere else.
A quick question.
Mm-hmm.
With the whole America not having a doctrinal role for the light SPG, I read a while back that that's because they split what other nations call the light SPG role between mortar teams and the conventional 155. How much truth is there to that?
None.
Okay.
The heavy mortars were always a thing separate, just because they provide much more responsive fires than you would get because their mortars are an infantry thing. The joke in artillery communities is that mortar crews are infantrymen cosplaying as artillerymen.
Good lord, that's an aggressive burn.
They're infantry community guys. They're not artillery community guys. So, and because of that, they're integrated directly into the infantry or combined arms battalion, depending on which unit they're in. If they're in heavy unit, it'd be combined arms battalion. Mm-hmm. If they're in strikers or if they're in a line unit, they're directly in the infantry battalion. Combined arms battalion, it's just called that. It's got the infantry, it's got the tanks. Gloss over that. Whereas even 105 guns, right, they're concentrated in an artillery unit because it makes sense to do that. For logistically, for massing fires, because 3 guns doesn't really do you much. It can be helpful, right? Don't get me wrong, it can be helpful. I'd rather have 3 guns than no guns. But 36 guns, when the brigade commander wants to make a statement, that's where you start seeing very important artillery results. You can do a lot with 3 guns, but what you cannot do is generate those traditional artillery effects.
Makes sense.
And when it comes to SPGs, the U.S. sort of sat down, did the math with the numbers of SPGs that we'd get, and realized, hang on, it's just far more efficient to go with 155s. They do the same thing. They're just as responsive. They're just as able to keep up with the armored forces or the mechanized forces. And they just pack a bigger punch, and you're not then left going, well, all I've got is 105s, but I need to scratch a 155 mission, right? Your 155s can do the 155 mission and the 105 mission. So
then, if that, then what would be the role of the 105 in nations that have them, but also maintain stuff like 155 and 156?
I mean, the 122, you mean?
Yeah.
So broadly, the Russians had moved away from 122 broadly. They had moved to 152. It's only the heavy attrition they've suffered in artillery that's driven them back to 122. The Ukrainians would have loved to standardize on 152. They didn't have the self-propelled vehicles to replace the 2S1 Gvozdyga. There's very little use in the West of self-propelled 105s outside of South Korea. And the South Koreans do it it's not even really a true self-propelled, it's more an en-porte with a 105 bolted to the back of a truck. It's not fully integrated like Caesar, for example. And that's just done so they can shoot and scoot. But it does not offer the advantages of the British, for example, 105 self-propelled, whose name I can't remember.
Abbott?
Predates. Abbott, right? Where that is basically just a 105 self-propelled gun. Straight up, it behaves very much like a M109, but in 105. I mean, it's smaller, obviously, it's lighter, yada yada, but the 105s that are typically used in the West are all towed guns, and airlift, like helicopter sling loadable as well. And that's just to get them to enable very light entry forces to have artillery support, like howitzer support. Because the 105 is going to reach longer than a mortar and can do missions a mortar cannot. And in many cases, it's not as easy to get a M777 in or another gun, because remember, an M777, you're not really going to be running it with Humvees. You're going to be running that with a 3-axle truck. 105s you can run with 2 Humvees. 777, you need 2 3-axle trucks per gun. It's also takes longer to emplace. Yes, it reaches further. And yeah, like 82nd has 777s. I believe they're actually pulled from the Virginia National Guard. I can't remember. I could be wrong. Might be 101st. But they have them, but that's not their initial access artillery. Their initial access artillery that they get's the 105s when they drop in. And that's gonna not happen immediately on dropping in, but that's the first howitzers they really are gonna be able to get in. And the other reason for the 105 is the ammunition's lighter. It's a lot easier to transport in large numbers of 105s via, let's call them alternate logistical means, things like helicopters, paradrop, right? Say you only have Humvees, you can move a lot more 105s than you can 155s, because the 155 weighs a lot more than a 105 shell, a lot more. And so that's the role that caliber tends to play in the West. It's a much more mobile, in terms of like strategic mobility rather than like tactical or operational, than a howitzer, or than a 155. The 122 is largely just because they never got replaced, or because other means have seen them put back into service. So
just to clarify, the 105 is pretty much a specialist weapon for specific deployments in the West now.
Outside of the British Army, because the British Army never procured M777. Like, they never procured a towed howitzer to replace their FH-70s. That capability just ceased to exist because they decided to only keep one towed howitzer, and because of the initial entry requirement for the Royal Marines and supporting them in the paras, they had to keep the
light gun
L119. yeah, they couldn't keep the FH-70, which was the Towed 155 of the British Army. I don't remember its L designation, but it was the Italian FH-70.
Right. Fantastic. Has anyone else got any more questions on this topic, or can we move on to the next question?
Probably an idea to move on if we want to try and get through questions on
Okay,
any reasonable pace.
I'm going to very quickly rapid fire two of Knight's questions because they're very easy for me to answer. Would the British
I would
have been
quite happily
better?
pick Cyclic's brain clean.
Yeah, I can tell. Problem is, you keep doing that when he's answered a question. You keep picking at his brain, and I keep not being able to move forward.
Well, Fleet, don't worry. You've answered, I think, now 4 of 27 questions.
Yes, I know. I
Fleet,
want to move faster.
I gave you a stream where you could have pulled that off, and you didn't. You had the 4th of July rambling. you could have used for that. You that could have been the one where people picked my brain.
I know,
right?
and they didn't show
You
up.
didn't
It's not
take
my
advantage
fault.
of it.
It's not my fault.
Nope.
Knight 6831 asks, would the British have been better served by 12... Okay, by various forms and marks of argosy, which is all in the...
What?
What did you just say?
Argosy.
Argosy?
Yes, the British transport aircraft with the bulbous nose. Clamshell doors at the front.
I just looked up that thing. Oh,
instead of conversions
poor
of planes from
pilot.
the 56 Armstrong Whitworth 660. Look, an Argosy is an Argosy is an Argosy. It's a 4-engine turboprop transport with front and rear clamshell doors. It's not going to make much umbrage. Exactly what version it is. Stop!
I can just hear Dragon in the background.
Right, moving on. Swiftly.
Right, can
Your
someone
typical-
post a picture? Because I can't. Can someone post a picture of the Argos?
Your typical gunnery officer asks, do you think the Challenger tank is more fitting for desert tank warfare than the Abrams, like we saw in Desert Storm, since the Abrams has a turbine engine and Sam will clog up the engine without good air filters, and also the Charlie got the longest range tank kill record, so do you think its optics and fire control are superior to the Abrams from the 1990s? I can actually
No.
weigh in on this one and say, yeah, Cyclic's absolutely correct. No, or a lot of this is based on...
They're both equally suited. Like,
yeah, like a lot of this is based
the
on
reason the Challenger
stereotypes.
has that shot, right? The reason the Challenger has that shot is, which by the way is no longer the longest range tank on tank engagement and kill.
No, it is not.
By a wide margin.
Yeah. Who's currently
but,
sitting on the longest? It's the Ukrainian crew. T8.
T-64 BV.
Nice. What was the kill range?
Like 6 kilometers.
What did the killing? Oh,
T-64 BV did it with cannon.
nice. What did they kill?
Like not ATGM. They were firing that. They had some spotting help from a drone, but
Nice. What did they kill?
they killed like a T-72.
Ooh, very nice. But a lot of this is actually down to this is stereotypes we see coming out of the war that are just fundamentally untrue. Like, for example, it's again, people keep bringing up the Abrams turbine engine.
The Abrams had a better uprate during, like, engine uprate during
they did.
Desert Storm than they did in Europe.
Yeah, they did this. This really annoys because a lot of it circles back to the group of American people we don't like to mention, who like to dump on things that don't fit exactly how they doctrinally think war should be fought. A lot of these rumours and a lot of this scuttlebutt comes from them. So the fact that the Abrams has a turbine engine and not a diesel is constantly brought up. And sand clogging up engines. It's the same thing we saw with the Crusader in the Western Desert. It's the same rumour that doesn't really have any basis in fact.
Yeah. It's the case of sand is the second most hostile thing on the planet, just behind salt water. Because any engine, you run it on sand, it will get clogged up.
It's just a matter of how long and how good your filters are.
It's the maintenance train behind it that matters.
Yeah,
Are you cleaning it regularly?
Yeah, and the thing is, the Abrams has this wonderful capability. You can open the engine deck, pull the gas turbine out, put a new one in, and off you go!
It's not even that. You can do this magical thing called installing a filter.
Well, yeah, that as well,
Yeah.
but also, it's just...
Yeah.
It's just...
It's also stuff like the supply of filters to the Army's logistics.
Was fantastic.
It's the supply of crews. It's
Again, it was
the
great.
supply of crews who are motivated and
Yeah.
won't just sign off saying it's done when it's not done.
Yeah, this is all just like American logistics during Desert Storm were fantastic. American tank crews during Desert Storm were fantastic. Like, the Americans don't have to strip tanks at home for service in Desert Storm. The British do. We have to strip
That's
the Challenger
an
fleet.
institutional issue.
It is, but holding up the Challenger as the point still stands. Like, it you can't. But basically that's basically we've basically summed it up. There's no need to go any further. It's all scuttlebutt with no basis in reality. The Abrams is a fantastic tank. So is the Challenger. End of story.
Yeah, it's not the tanks themselves at this point, it's the forces that are using them. And both are professional fighting forces.
Yep.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to... I'm hesitant to call Challenger 1 a fantastic tank. And the reason for that is some very fundamental problems in its frontal armor that originate from it effectively being a Chieftain product improved.
Yeah, it's fair. That is fair.
Like, it's only got composite armor, or not composite, NERA, not explosive reactive armor.
Yeah.
On the upper front part of the upper front glacis. That doesn't fully extend all the way down. The other problem I have is the driver's trench on both 1 and 2 that compromises the armor. There have been multiple versions, Spirit, of the Abrams that have had diesels.
A lot of the export
experimental
versions.
and potential export versions that nobody ever really bought. Challenger 1 as a tank is designed to sit there static with just its turret poking above the terrain and not maybe moving back to reload and then moving forward to the same position. It's not designed in a manner to be moving between multiple firing positions. It's also not the tank the British Army wanted. Same thing with Challenger 2, which is something that people... No, Spiteful Ghost. They are not built on British doctrine at all. They were built and designed for the Shah's army in Iran. Charlie 1 was built and designed for a completely different army that fought completely different.
Yeah.
MBT-80 was built around how the British Army wanted to use armor, and was a much more mobile, with a much better armor array design. As far as we are aware, and also originally designed with a smoothbore from the get-go.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question is from Knight again, which is... yes. It is said, without Vietnam, the USAF would buy surplus USN A4 Skyhawks as their CAS plane. Would that actually happen?
With CAS plane?
Yeah, with no Vietnam.
A4?
Yeah.
A4 is not a CAS plane. And the U.S. Air Force wasn't looking for a CAS plane, and honestly wasn't looking for one afterwards, even with the A-10. The A-10 was programmed that program did not start as a CAS program. It started as a Skyraider replacement to run armed escort for rescue helicopters.
Well, there you go. The more you know.
And by the way, post-Vietnam, both the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy would buy 2 versions of the same aircraft for an attack role. The A-7, Corsair 2.
Very nice.
Wasn't the Skyraider getting a bit longer in the tooth by Vietnam, if I remember correctly?
This was a dramatically different version of the Skyraider than first procured, but yes, it was pretty long in the tooth. It was not survivable against ground defenses. Even in the environment where you'd be sending a rescue helicopter, which is one of the reasons why you had the YA-9, YA-10B jet, significantly faster than an A-10 or than a A-1. Sorry, but the aircraft that would have been doing most of the CAS, because CAS was not the prime job of an attacker. At the U.S. Air Force, it's not the Air Force's primary job in terms of engaging enemy ground units. That's air interdiction. That's preventing them from getting to the fight to begin with. The ones most likely to be doing it just by dint of numbers, it's the A7 post Vietnam. It's not the A10, it's the A7s. And the A7s are better suited for it because right off the bat, they get those early targeting pods. The A10 does not get targeting pods until the A10C. After the A10 eviscerates way too many friendly forces in 91 because they have absolutely no situational awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were designed to be a modern armed escort aircraft for helicopters. Well, it's pretty easy. If your friendlies are helicopters in the air and your enemy is where you see those tracers coming from, at the helicopters, you don't really need a targeting pod to see that and start suppressing that.
Nope.
But
yeah,
the A10 got thrust into a casserole that it just was not designed for and not at all good at.
Yeah,
It
so
only
the
gets
A10
good at CAS in the counterinsurgency environment of GWAT, Global War on Terror, for those who didn't hear earlier.
I'd argue that it's more of a light bomber now than a CAS aircraft.
Not really. It's going back into that general attack role, but it only gets really known for that with the A10C, which integrates a targeting pod, a helmet-mounted display with a HUD/MFD, multifunction display, repeater in the visor, so that the pilot can match what he's seeing with the targeting pod with what he or she is seeing with their eyeballs, and look at what they're seeing, lock it as a target point for their targeting pod, then saves it. And so they can go back to heads down, knowing, yes, that's what I'm looking at. That's the target. Okay, that is hostile. I can engage that. Let me talk to the JTAC. Right? Which the F-16, I mean, it doesn't have the repeater in the helmet, but the F-16 and F-18 can do that look with their eyes and tell their targeting pod to look, and then look down into their MFD and go, yes, that's hostile, or no, that's friendly, right? Talk to the JTAC just as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an easier canopy for looking out with their own two eyeballs. And they can get even closer to friendly forces, by the way, than the A-10 can on strafing runs, because they're not running a 30 millimeter. They're running 20s. They can get in even closer. And that 30 millimeter, not good at engaging tanks, despite what people think. Even going back to the original tests.
Yeah, if it can't PSM 47s, then what's the point?
I mean, it's good at engaging BTRs and BMPs and MTLBs and trucks and stuff like that. But, you know, why are you doing that when every BMP and BTR has two man pads in the back?
Yeah.
And the troops inside are trained to fire them while on the move.
Yep. Makes sense.
You're just asking to get shot down.
Yep.
So the A10
you're going to have 16, somewhere between 8 and 31 man pads coming up at you. You're not flaring all of them.
Yeah. Just very quickly.
part of the reason. God.
It's just very quickly in response just to a comment Knight made in relation to probably a discussion we were talking about earlier. He says, so Putin is threatening with long-range missiles. He's making it hard not to become an anxious wreck. Dude, you're fine. There's not going to be... Like, Russia's not going to do anything, as Cyclic says. They're caught in
See
an
what I said
escalation
earlier
ladder.
about the U.S. having Russia in an escalation trap. Russia can't raise their nuclear alert level beyond a certain point before the U.S. just goes, and you're not a problem.
He can
Because
proclaim all he wants about how we're going to do this, but
yeah,
won't.
far
I'm guessing he
more
knows he
ready to
can't.
shoot than they are. Like, they can't. They're not going to be able. If they suddenly start throwing out their tells to a dispersal pattern, if they suddenly start sending out the warheads from the storage facilities to where their bombers are, and the U.S. believes they're prepping for actual nuclear use, the U.S. is not going to wait for them to get into a position where they're prepared. The U.S. is just going to send it, and the U.S. is already in a position to utterly wreck their ability to launch.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go over that discussion again.
That's why I just summed it up right
Yeah,
then.
thank you. Lazy Author Sound on Discord asks, if for insert reason the Italians hadn't invaded Greece, thus meaning Germany can now invade USSR in May 15th as they originally planned, would that change anything, like the Germans capturing Leningrad or Stalingrad, or is it simply a small change of dates?
No.
It can change. It can change a few things. Giving them an extra month can. It also gives the Russians an extra less of a month to actually. Because remember, every month the Russians gain is a month that they are working through the issues caused by the purges, and it might not sound like much, but it is.
Well,
It's not going to change the war drastically, but you might see some cities change hands. You might see the German summer offensive in 42 get further, but it's not going to change much beyond that.
Honestly, I'm more interested in what are the Italians doing instead of invading Greece.
Because with the Eastern Front, I don't know, they stop in the first year because they outrun their logistics, which take until the next year to get somewhat functional again. Giving them an extra month of campaign time doesn't really fix that issue. They've still got to deal with the Soviet railway gauge. They've still got to deal with the mud seasons. The Red Army.
I mean, the real problem is the mud season. The Soviet railway gauge is
Rasputia is a problem.
I mean, the Russian railway gauge is bigger than the standard gauge, but it's not by as much as people think. Conversion is fairly easy for wagons and locomotives. It's a problem.
It's inefficiencies.
It is inefficiencies, but it is mainly, it's not rail that's the problem. It's rail to units that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's the mud season, it's the lack of motorized logistics, it's all of that. But yeah, like I said, it doesn't change overly much. But
actually, it might, because if the Germans get bogged down earlier, they would be more prepared for the winter campaign.
True.
Because there is a series of pushes once the Rasputitsa freezes over.
That's true, actually. Yeah, it's a good point.
Because people tend to forget the fronts. There were winter offensives throughout the entire Eastern Front.
That's a point. If the Germans get bogged down before winter starts to hit and they realize that they're going to be here, like Russia hasn't collapsed. We're going to be here over winter now. There's not that, because if in the last month before they get bogged down in our timeline, there's a big let's one final effort, then Russia will but that's it. We'll take Moscow and all. Well, possibly the frontline staff believes that'll be that. If it's clear that's not going to happen, there might be a move to not winter quarters per se, but prepare for a longer campaign and possible Russian counterattack in winter.
Because it's the Germans who are who's going to try to continue the attack in the winter, but they're real prepared for it.
Yeah.
If you add a month more preparation, because the Red Army uses this from what I've read. I like David Glantz, but people point out flaws in his work. It's more of just interdicting the Red Army's attempts at reorganizing on the front, which would have interesting consequences. But that's an entire auditorium full of butterflies.
Yeah.
That's not a single butterfly flapping its wings. That's it. You've got several thousand.
Yeah. Your typical. So that's one from Discord. One from YouTube. Which is, let me think. That's not a question. That is a question. If the MBT-80, the tank the British wanted, got built, wouldn't that become the Challenger? I don't know what it would be called. It might adopt the same name. Might not. Hard to say. Where were we?
The answer is the British names often just turn out to be, what did the engineers call it?
Yeah. Your typical gunnery officer asks, why didn't the British adopt the Matchbox launcher on their ships, since it's a great multi-purpose launcher that could launch ASROC and anti-ship missiles?
Cyclic? Can you still be there?
What was that?
Why didn't the British adopt the Matchbox launcher on their ships, since it's a great multi-purpose launcher that could launch ASROC and anti-ship missiles?
Because they didn't use ASROC. They didn't use Harpoon. In that
They
period.
eventually used Harpoon, but yeah.
But they, like,
But
in
that's
that
after those mounts, yeah.
Yeah, where the Matchbox was prevalent, like, they didn't use either munition. They repeatedly toyed with their own standoff ASW capability, and didn't end up going with it because of money. But
everyone's saying they had Ikara, which is what we've already mentioned, I think.
yeah, but it didn't really meaningfully enter into service in the Royal Navy, or remain very long.
Yeah.
I think the Australians made more use of it.
Didn't the Australians develop it, or am I thinking of something else?
I know they used it, but yeah, like, that's sort of the story on that.
Oh, yeah, they did, actually.
Yeah, that's about the size of it.
And I mean, keep in mind, the Matchbox only gives you 2 ready-to-fire harpoons. Then you have to reload from your magazine. So, yeah, it's that.
Yeah. So, next question is, I think.
It's also on the P-26P shooter.
No,
Worst
we
aircraft
got
in the interwar years.
YouTube question first.
That was. I thought you just did a YouTube question.
No, we did a Discord question. On the Matchbox launcher.
Time to go scroll back a fair bit. I might have missed that one then.
Yeah. Next question from Knight is I'm going to group it all into one question. Wouldn't the 12 Boeing UH-60, UH-46B Sea Knights be bought instead of the latest CH-3 and HH-3 Sea Kings without Vietnam? And as the HH-43 Huskies come up for replacement, wouldn't more UH-64Bs be bought to replace them? I'm completely out of my depth. That is too much helicopter jargon for me.
Can you, DM me that question?
I can.
We need a Wafu for that.
There you go. Got it. DM sent. Where were we?
So I mean the Sea King fills a different role than the Sea Knight did. Like it is a completely different class of. If I'm now I'm getting that confused. Hang on, I got. Okay. Yeah, no, that is used for a completely different role. Of an aircraft, used for different things. So this is a little bit of an awkward period for the U.S. Navy. I think this is relating to vert rep helicopters, so vertical replenishment, sling loading in packets of pallets.
I think so.
The CH-3, HH-3s really weren't used in that role all that much. I mean, they could, and they'd be very good at it, but they weren't helicopters you'd see on carriers. Or even attached to a replenishment vessel for that. You would occasionally see Sea Kings get used as like a contracted helicopter to support later on. But there really was no replenishment for the 46 in that role. It was just because the U.S. just ended up procuring more Seahawks. And the reason I'm so sort of apprehensive on answering this is I'm not 100% sure what the question is related to. I feel like this is a question directly related to something being discussed in a previous podcast.
Yeah, I think,
and I don't know what that was.
No, neither do I.
I don't have the context.
I think neither do we. I think you've got. I think you've done the best you can. Good officer, thoughts on the P-26 Pea Shooter, worst aircraft of the interwar years? Oh, I know you did not just sit there and slander the glorious little fighting bumblebee.
I think he did, and I think he did for valid reason.
I wouldn't call it a fighting aircraft or a bumblebee. I'd call it a kite.
It's not the worst aircraft of the interwar period, though.
What is then, Fleet? What is actually worse than it?
Like as a dedicated fighter.
Oh, as a dedicated fighter? It's not terrible.
Like Foxo pointed out the ferry battle earlier, but honestly, I think I'd still put the ferry battle ahead of it.
The ferry battle.
Keep in mind, the P-36 is 1932.
The Blackburn.
Yeah.
Still probably put it ahead of this.
Okay, all right then. What's wrong with the pea shooter?
Ugly.
That's not ugly.
Honestly,
it is incredibly anachronistic as a fighter for 1932.
Oh, is that when it entered service? I thought it was earlier than that.
That's its first flight.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's not a bad aircraft, it's just obsolete.
No,
it is.
Right. It's got two 7.62mm machine guns.
That's all. Yeah.
And it can get, if it's feeling lucky, will carry two 100-pound bombs. So you could try and do something with it. The engine is pretty mediocre. It is a Pratt & Whitney Wasp 9-cylinder, which isn't bad, but for the amount of horsepower that you're putting out, for the weight, it's mediocre. It's only got a 2-blade propeller. It's pretty bad.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Something that a 5-year-old would drive would draw.
Yeah, probably right.
Again, sorry. Also, for the record, the Blackburn is 1922.
Okay,
So-
all right, you've made your point. Fleet is a bad judge of aircraft.
Also,
I'm
as
not
I recall, it's got an open canopy, which is not ideal. It's not the worst
1932.
picture
That's
I've
not
seen.
out of the ordinary there.
That's extremely common.
Yeah.
But it is the sort of thing that you pretty quickly you'll be wanting to try and remove.
I mean, when you look at the actual aircraft, what the hell is that fin on the top, just behind the cockpit? Is it like, do they take shark motifs and what?
No, that's to
don't
reduce the drag
actually know.
caused by the pilot's face and head. Because
Oh
when you
my
get
God.
vortices forming behind something, that creates a lot of drag.
Okay. Also, what's up with that fixed landing gear?
That's pretty common for late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, but
They
it's
just put some sheet metal over it to lower the
I think
drag.
I think what Jibber's trying to say is that's very big for
It
landing
looks
gear.
far bigger and bulkier than it is. Most of that's just fairing to protect with drag.
Mhm.
Okay, now for the question I've actually been waiting for since... Oh, never mind. A question from Knight, then we get onto the one I've been waiting for since I saw it appear. Knight says, why
You're not the only one who's
did-
been thinking about that one.
Why did the RN not go with a pylon for the Sea Harrier that allowed it to carry 2 Sea Eagle anti-ship missiles? Probably because the Sea
I'm
Harrier is not meant to be
Pretty
a strike
sure
asset.
the Sea Harrier was designed to carry the Sea Eagle. Like they took them south in the Falklands with them.
At least a number of them could carry sea.
Sea Harrier
yeah.
could carry 2.
So I guess that's a quick and easy answer to that one. They did.
Oh man, I bet the Brits wish they could take AMRAAM down in the Falklands, but it didn't exist.
Sadly not.
Just see it on that Sea Harrier in that image. No doubt fired pit bolt in that case, or nearly, but like still.
So I've actually looked to see what's for the qualifier for this question, and I've got it, so I'm just going to read it full.
It's April.
Yeah. Admiral Wellesley T. Collingwood asks if all of us were on a battleship design committee in the Royal Navy in 1936 in April after Second London has concluded, which I presume also means including the Japanese walking out of it, what would you guys...
Escalator courses are invoked,
Yeah.
is what I'm guessing.
What would you guys end up designing? Well, I'm going to open the bidding with...
Because I want to lay down as many battleships as fast as possible to get them in service as fast as possible.
No, King George V.
I'm curious to hear what you'll say, Fleet, and then I'll pose
King George
my
V
question.
isn't our responsibility. They're already locked in and being laid down.
We can't stop that.
Our responsibility is what's following her. Or them.
We
I
must
should say.
focus on speed.
I disagree. I'm going to open the bidding.
I would literally just go KGV but 16-inch and move on.
But that's basically Lion.
Yeah.
Like, at that point, revive the Lion design.
Well, it's not even that. It's just, and the reason why is it's something you can do relatively quickly, right? Because it is something you've already studied doing. You can get it in motion and get it building. And if I'm the US, the answer is Sodax.
I might
More
not
Sodax.
go actual Lion as we were going to get her. I might personally, if I'm thinking 36, if we're just trying to get more battleships out, I might actually think of going a more Vanguard style. We've got 15-inch guns in supply. If we just need more ships, 4x2 15-inch will still work. Get a bit of a higher speed out of her. Make her hit 30 knots. So you've got a decent 30 to 32 knots. You can make a pretty decent fast capital unit then. Probably keep with the 4 per side, 5.25 inch.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know if I would so much bother versus, again, just spamming more lions, because the one thing you can say about the UK and its naval shipbuilding industry at this point in time, they absolutely could and were going to drown the Axis in lions, essentially. Like, granted, obviously, with King George V out of the gate initially, because, you have your Littorios to worry about, you have your Bismarcks to worry about, Scharnhorst, etc. But, they were going to actually pull up the list here because I have it on hand somewhere. Because they were basically going at the pace of ordering 2 lions per year from 1938 on, and the commission rate on those were going to be. Hang on 1 second.
Was this 1938, or were we kicking it?
1938 is the first time they were ordered.
No, the question.
But that's just again because of the
Question's
pace
designing
of.
from 1936. So from
That's
if you want-
yeah. That's
Well,
why
yeah,
I
you have
was
to
like,
design. You have to design the battleship before you actually order it,
Yeah.
authorize it, have it start heading production. Because let's see, the first pair of lions
I mean,
were
if
laid
the
down in
lion design is ready,
1939,
just
and we're
run
gonna. Yeah, because the
Aw.
first pair of lions were laid
You
down in
had to all be
1939, and we're going to
boring,
be
didn't you?
insert.
You had to
We're
all
going to
be
complete
boring,
in
didn't you?
That
basically
makes
December
sense.
1942
I've
and
got
January 1943. The second pair were going to be laid down later on in 1939 and also be completed in 1943. And I think the third pair were probably going to be laid down in 1940 and then follow. So these are all laid down. The first 6 lions would all be laid down before Vanguard even, and enter service before her, and actually enter service before any of the H-39 battleships that the Germans were planning on building under Plan Z. So
I thought Lions basically entered design stage in 37 primarily, not 36.
No. As soon as it became clear escalator clause was going to be invoked, the RN said, "Right, okay, we're going back to the drawing board," literally instantly. And they already, bear in mind, Dragon, the RN already had a plan for a 16-inch escalator KV in case the treaties did fail.
No. I'm pretty sure we've heard almost definitively that it's not a 16-inch KG.
No, but the design was refined and turned into what we recognise as Lion. Because they'd done the basic work.
I said I could find 37 at least, but not 36 things. But I can still see it. But
Oh no!
overall, instead of just if I was not necessarily just going for Lion, as I'd try and do something Vanguard-esque if we're just trying to get ships as quick as possible. Because 15-inch 42 is still a reasonably acceptable gun. It'll get the job done. I prefer a 15-inch 45, or even better, the 15-inch Mark III that they did have one of the Lion proposals, but the question is, will that be available in time? Same thing for the 16-inch Mark II.
Since none of you people are willing to be the crazy naval designer in the room, looks like I have to do it.
Oh, go.
I haven't
Oh,
done yet.
Alright,
Yeah, like-
alright, James, then
yeah,
you
Shipyard's still
go.
got his,
Alright, James, you go first then.
and then there's
Alright.
Foxo as well.
I was going to dredge something out from the 1920s.
Oh, come on. Oh,
This should be
I
fun.
swear to God, if the pair of you try to resurrect the G3 or the N3, I'm going to scream.
wait, I thought we're talking
Oh,
escalator clause ships.
No, this is freshly designed brand. Like you can design whatever you wish, sort of thing.
Oh no.
Well, yeah, but I thought this was still had to deal with the escalator clause.
Basically, it's post-escalate. The whole question is, you are design committee in the Royal Navy, April 1936, post-escalator clause invoking.
So we've
What
got a
do
bit
you
more
do?
tonnage to play with. We've got like Iowa levels of tonnage to play with. So we can be a bit creative.
I was going to go with an F3.
That wouldn't
I was
be...
wondering if you're going to mention those.
An uprated F3 wouldn't be the worst idea, but it is just...
Well, what do you mean by
it is
uprated exactly?
a refined F3 built to escalator clause tonnage, which is basically what you wanted. Is basically what you wanted to do anyway. It's basically Vanguard in a slightly different turret
No, it's
layout,
not.
but it's basically a Vanguard.
She's a bow tanker.
Yeah, she's Nelson style.
No,
3x3
you'll
all forward.
notice that I said it's a
Or
different
2x4.
turret arrangement, but it's basically the same principle as Vanguard.
Yes, and
And if it's me,
there's multiple differentiations between Vanguard and the F3, even modernized.
if it's me,
Do you think?
I'm gonna
Go on,
go.
Shipyard. What?
Sorry, no, you first.
If you think about it, if you go for an F3, you have a primary forward battery up front, which then means you can basically bow tank and basically do a Rodney. You also have a very large aft end, if you build it to technically a battleship's length to beam ratio.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of room for anti-aircraft upgrades.
Mhm.
She'll be basically a British version of the Jean Bar,
I
but
suppose.
earlier.
I suppose.
Is this going in the 2x4 or the 3x3 design? I know there was two
Uh,
different. I think they're technically different variants, but there was a 2x4 and one which is 3x3.
The one I'm looking at is basically design F3 on shit bucket.
I think that's the 3x3 one, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah, I
no,
think so.
Yeah.
If it's me, since it's my turn now, I'm going to sit there and go.
They get her up to 30 knots
While you gentlemen
with your extra tonnage.
While you gentlemen are sitting there building 30-knot fast battleships, well, you're looking at Lion being a 30-knot, 9/16-inch armed ship. I'm gonna go. Well, that's okay. That's all well and good.
Ideally, I'd like 32 knots, but
But I'm not happy with that. I'm looking at.
Are you bringing out Incomparable?
I'm looking. No.
that was
let me-
mentioned earlier.
Let me finish.
That would be glorious, but
No, we can't let Fleet finish.
I'm looking
keep
at the
edging him, eh?
rumblings coming out of Japan about a possible 50,000-ton ship armored against 16-inch guns, and I want to overmatch that with more firepower. So I'm going to build my Lion class as a 28-knot ship with 12 16-inch guns in 4 triples, rather than a 30-knot ship with 3 triples.
that's bigger Rook, isn't it?
Yes, that's
That's
K3.
Yeah, I was thinking of the one which is only 15 and 16.5-inch variant, not the
Yeah.
18-inch.
Because, let's be real, if the treaties are gone, you're going to want guns bigger. than
The
everyone
treaties
else.
aren't
Yeah.
gone. We're still under escalator clause, so we do have a limit of 16-inch guns.
Yeah, but the escalator clause is temporary, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
It's someone's breaking the treaties, we're going to
I-
start building up.
I would bear in mind that, again, part of the consideration when you're looking at your battleship fleet, especially for the UK in this point in time, is not just what is the individual capability of any ship, but also how many of them can I actually afford to build at once. This includes, things like, what capacity of barrel size my production plants can take in what volume, and how my turret fits to build the turrets, right? And how many am I going to need, and in what time frame? Because the larger and more expensive you make a ship, if it's having huge honking plates of armor and heavier guns, the longer it'll take to produce all of this, and the longer it'll take to get these ships into service.
This is one of the reasons why.
Which again is part of the reason why the British were looking at. And it's via the British, remember, you're dealing with a potential 3 different fronts, so you want to be able to build more ships rather than less, because you have to deal with so many potential adversaries. You really don't want to chase down building a single super battleship, because then you're fucked if, say, well, we need this X number of ships in Europe to deal with the Germans and the Italians, and then what about the Japanese? And actually, we need 2 fleets on either side of the Mediterranean, plus the one at home, plus home fleet, plus Far East fleet. And then you just kind of rapidly spiral out of control, and that's why you really want to cut down on the individual size of battleships. This is why the British spent so much time in the interwar trying to cut down on the individual size of any given ship.
Yeah, this is one
Be
of
it
the.
cruisers or battleships.
I probably wouldn't include battleships in the Far East fleet that heavily to begin with, though, at least initially. It's also why I would try and want a 15-inch gun design, because we have the 15-inch Mark II was basically ready, from what I recall. The design plans were all there, and spooling the factories probably wouldn't be too hard with Vickers. And there was, in 36, 37, the idea of a 15-inch 45 Mark III, so another improved variant from what I'm hearing.
Yeah. One of the
which
reasons...
you can get those probably pretty quickly in production.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why, bearing in mind what Phoenix said, my design for a heavier battleship was basically the same displacement as a Lion. It's just trading its 2 knots of extra speed for an additional triple turret. It's not massively pushing the boat out in a ridiculous way.
I don't see why you need that extra triple turret.
What's the displacement of the line we're talking about?
It's basically down to the fact that I'm I'm trying to not use too much hindsight. So I'm looking at the rumblings coming out of Japan, which even then were extant, of them building something far in excess of the treaties. And I'm looking at going...
That's what
right,
K3 is, Akatsuki. It's a British hire with 18-inch guns.
Yeah. So, and I'm looking...
I would just say,
I'm
I would
looking
bear in
at...
mind,
Go on, Phoenix. Go on, Phoenix.
if you're adding an extra turret to a battleship, you're cutting your overall battleship production volume in any given period of time by about a third, because you're taking that extra gun pit to provide that fourth turret.
Yeah,
That's always one of those things to keep in mind when you're talking
No,
about
that's
a
a
larger
good point.
ship,
That's a good
larger
point.
guns, more turrets.
Yeah, that's a good
Because that
point.
was one of the big
No,
differences
I hadn't
the British had in
considered
this
that.
period too, just how many available gun pits they had
Yeah.
versus before World War One, because of how much. Obviously they weren't building battleships before the war; they were only reconditioning turrets. So naturally, a lot of the old gun pits were in production facilities that shut down and were no longer usable.
Phoenix, you're absolutely right. I hadn't actually thought about that. No, that's a very,
Personally-
very interesting point. That I hadn't
Personally, I'm trying to
considered.
not use hindsight as well, Fleet. I still would want a higher top speed, though.
No,
Especially
going...
because basically, Repulse and Renown are getting a bit tired.
on-
Renown does get a refit, but Repulse is still needing it. And we've got Hood, who's also getting very, very tired.
honestly, going for
So
faster
we probably
lines
want a fast element.
is one of the things that is actually a reasonable change, because we do actually have the capability to build turbines without much limits, because remember, the liner industry's been going strong in the interwar period. You've seen the restoration of the large liner industry with ships like Queen Mary and her follow-ons, the Cunard and others. So the industry to build large turbines at scale exists and is extant. So stretching for extra speed is actually something that we can do as Britain, whereas stretching for extra guns or more ships may be difficult. But going for a slightly larger line with 32 knots is not outside the realms of possibility.
I'm still a little skeptical of jumping to the 16-inch again.
I
Because-
think
I also
looking,
like
looking at the time
semi-standard,
frame, looking at the time frame we've got, we're looking at the lines coming in after the KGVs. We've got the time to work up a 16.
Yeah,
Or
but
we can go with a 15 that's already worked up.
Yeah, Dragon, just to point out, unless you're going with a 1542, the 15s aren't worked up, though.
Mm, They've at least
Because...
designed they've at least
Yeah,
also got
but-
similar designs. So, it's basically then, do you want 15 or 16? Is what it comes down to.
Because
I just want to remind
one-
you, TikTok goes the clock. We got more questions too.
Yep,
Yeah.
fair point.
Oh,
yeah.
like I've already, we're not going to be able to get through all the questions. Like
Yeah.
we're at 40 odd questions just for Discord, and we're on question 9 of Discord.
like, you got the 18-inch guns at Ellswick, technically, so...
But again, that's a very, very, very technically, in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Not that it's not as technically as you think.
Yeah, but think about it. If you're spinning up new guns from a production line, you're going to want something that's bigger and better than what's current big thing. The big thing currently 16-inch. So 18s make sense.
The only
That
problem
way.
is if we're stuck with being limited to 16-inch at maximum still, going from 14s to 16s, we can't use the 18s. If that bit's still in effect.
Yeah, that's
So,
the thing. So
Therefore, it's either the
16s.
15 or the 16.
And
And
honestly,
then it comes down to which one do we think will work better?
the 16.
15-inch 45 or the new 16?
The 16.
Okay, dumb question. If you build a turret for triple 18s, can you put quad 16s in it?
In theory, it's that's the way the conversion goes.
Very
you can
wide.
you can step. You can
entirely
step.
depends on the turret design.
Yeah,
really.
exactly. But it's like the
Because there are
the
cases.
basic conversion goes, step up a caliber, step down a caliber, step up barrel count, step down barrel count,
Yeah, it's
step
like
up a
2 inches
caliber.
per barrel, give or take.
Yeah, but bear in mind that's very,
I mean,
very
it's kind of-
rough, and it's very rarely been done in actual history in terms of actual conversion.
Hypothetically,
Then would be-
you could strip out a Scharnhorst's 11-inch turret in terms of their weight and barbette size and track, and you could stick American 14-inch triple turrets in the exact same spot. which doesn't seem to you wouldn't think that would be the way the math would actually work out on just looking from the outside. But again, turret designs can be very finicky and dependent on the specific designs and layout, so it's very hard to give like a simple rule for this kind of thing. Especially because as you go up in calibers, you're causing a lot of changes in terms of the internal passages within the Corvette, as far as shifting rounds around and their charges. Usually you're also having to question what other sacrifices you're making in terms of protection as well.
Yeah.
So I do agree, Leslie. Britain probably would have far preferred 16.5 over the 16s, but unfortunately we are still limited by treaty. So we're not allowed 16.5s.
So my question would be, could you design for the 18s but fit 16s, and then when the treaty collapses,
you could
right?
You could in theory.
Right. The ones that are under construction now have 18s in, and we've built the 18-inch guns.
To be fair, if you've got a quad 16-inch gun, you go with the quad 16, because what's going to stop that, really?
Yeah, like it's
They're not built against 16-inch.
It's one of those.
People are building battleships again.
Yamato?
Yeah, Yamato can't Yamato can't resist 16-inch. Well, she can, but she can't.
Yeah, but that's hindsight. That would be hindsight, because what's stopping? I don't know. From what I know, what's stopping Japan or somehow Germany or one of their threats from going? We need to make a battleship that's resistant to 16-inch guns.
I feel like the 18s are a stretch too far. I feel like the 18s are a stretch too far and an unneeded stretch,
I unfortunately tend to agree. They would probably be on the ship afterwards.
Yeah.
Like if
how many can you get a useful number of guns on a ship of a given size that is economical and makes sense to actually build for you as the Royal Navy, who needs to have a certain number of capital ships to cover all your bases and replace also the really old and obsolescent ships in your fleet. When you think, like say the Revenge class, Queen Elizabeth's coming up on their age as well. You don't really want to be focusing on a small number of extremely well-fitted ships, be that 18-inch or kind of a stupid number of 16-inch guns even, which I think you're kind of getting to when you're talking about 16-inch quads. Usually you really don't want to have a ship where you're running more than 12 guns of a given caliber in this era, because you usually can afford to go up a tick in caliber anyways. But then again, there's also the question of what is the maximum displacement size of ship you really should be pursuing in the first place. If you need to build a certain number of ships in a certain amount of time to cover a certain number of contingencies. Because again, you as the Royal Navy have to consider, what if I end up in a war with 3 different powers, and you're not necessarily banking on the American being on your side in those wars. I mean, obviously the Americans aren't going to be at war with you, but nor are they necessarily going to be jumping into that war immediately.
Yeah.
You just can't bank on that. You just don't know. And also, I have to imagine, the Royal Navy knows their Lanchester squares, and probably knows that it is generally not wise to pursue small super battleships or a small number of super battleships to try and overwhelm a larger number of enemy battleships, because that's just not how the math works out, regardless of you having heavier firepower or not.
Yeah, exactly.
On
Right.
that note, I'm gonna throw my funny in the ring. A British Richelieu.
Yeah, that was an actual design. There was a Lion, which is what's it called? One of the Lion 45s, the 2x4 15-inch Mark III.
Yeah.
And I mean, make it cheaper.
It could be done. Right. So, very, very quickly, where are we? Oh, this is all related to earlier questions.
This would be one of the YouTube ones.
Admiral. Well, no, I've told Knight, since he's the one asking you questions, I'm focusing on to work through the Discord questions.
Right.
Admiral Wellesley T. Collingwood, have you guys seen the Napoleonic Invasion of Britain video by Alternate History Hub? If you have, what are your thoughts? I've seen it. The Royal Navy got done dirty. I'm sorry to say, but I don't care how. Even if the French win Trafalgar, even if the Napoleon gets ashore, even if, like he says, the Royal Navy can be pulled 3 different ways. He said, the Royal Navy can do this and this and this and this, but it can't do all of it. I'm like, no, yeah, it can. If the homeland's threatened, the RN's recalling everything from everywhere to just flood the seas around the British Isles with frigates, ships of the line. The Royal Navy can and will be everywhere at once. That's the only thing about it. The land battles were fairly straightforward, and I didn't find much issue with the way he portrayed them and the outcomes. But yeah, the Royal Navy got done dirty. Hell, losing Trafalgar in the first place is just impossible.
It's possible.
It's possible.
I wouldn't say impossible.
It's the age of fucking sail fleet. Weirder things have happened.
If the Spanish and the French were better drilled in gunnery, that battle could have been really ugly.
Yeah.
But they weren't. And I do
and
think
also
that
point out that
factored into Nelson's calculations, too. But
Oh, it absolutely did. I mean, I think that's one of those things you got to say about Trafalgar, that the tactics are very stupid, except unless you're Nelson pulling off that action
Pulling it
with
off
the
against
British fleet that
those
you know you
opponents
have
at
against
that
the enemy
time.
fleet that you know about. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He was made a very calculated choice of aggression based off of what he knew of himself, his own fleet, and the enemy fleets. Otherwise, you know, if the Spanish and French fleets were drilled to a similar standard as his own ships and his own crews, he never would have gone in with the same kind of tactics. He would have picked a completely different tack. In a figurative sense, not the literal sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah, fleet tactics and naval operations. There's a whole bunch to say about that action. In the Nile.
Where are we?
Yeah, 'cause as I understand it, he also, to some degree, knew about the French and the Revolutionary French's gutting of the Naval High Command and a lot of political appointees, which is part of the reason the French Navy wasn't in a great position.
Yeah, no, the Malays in the French and Spanish fleets was known. Both by just general news and also word of mouth and such, but also the fact that they had been clashing with those fleets and they knew the deficiencies.
Your Moe waifu asks, question, if Vanguard was preserved as a museum ship like the Iowas were at the time of her retirement, how early would they have to be to reactivate her to make the Falklands War? She basically has to not be retired. If she's retired into museum status in the early 60s...
You don't bring ships back from museum status.
No, you don't. You basically have to not make her a museum. If she's a museum, she's not going to the Falklands. Simple as.
She also doesn't.
And if she's in deep layup, she's not rapidly going down. She's not sailing with the fleet.
Yeah.
And you look at how fast that fleet deployed and needed to deploy. She would have to be, she could be in a reserve status, but being in such a status would be too expensive.
And time consuming too. I mean, look at their effort to pull Tiger out to bring her down, and that was, not too much of a cost, and also just too late by the time it was that they got work done. I mean, you just wouldn't with Vanguard. She's just not worth it anyways. I can't think of a single capability she brings that's really worth the effort.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say it would only be worth the effort if and only if she got those 3-inch autos at some point. But I don't see her getting refit like that, to be honest.
Unless she was kept in service and the government had a lot of money to waste.
But even then,
Yeah.
Thing is, Thatcher probably
They would have wasted the money on more profitable things, or more useful things, I should say, not profitable.
British government
other
would have
ships
gone
with
into
the
the
same 3-inch
politicians'
guns,
pockets.
or just war-guided missile destroyers.
If you have the money to keep Vanguard in service, you have the money to get a Malta.
Yep, basically.
One of these is far more useful than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these would have completely changed the situation in the Falklands.
Well, provided the Malta was still around.
It would have been.
You one better.
Having a brand new, or effectively brand new carrier at the time period the Maltas would have entered service would have made things dramatically cheaper on the carrier capability front.
Would the Maltas still have been 40 years old at that point?
They would have been old.
35. 35.
Yeah, but the Midways were still around.
I'm not referring to that decision in the 80s. I'm referring to that decision when the Maltas are getting built relative to the problems the Brits were having with the light fleets at the time.
My problem with this would be Ark Royal, a ship of a similar age, was already gone by the Falklands and for a long time she was in a very bad state.
Yes, but I would.
This is
can't-
this is one of the times where I really wish Dr. Clark was here, or Drac.
Funnily enough,
but when you
Let's
Sorry.
finish, please, Fleet.
Sorry.
when you sit down and you do the math about what happens if that program goes through and you trim out the light fleets, which are incredibly expensive to maintain for the very rather limited capability the RN was able to get out of them. You have a much better argument to keep 2 Maltas around, and what that does for the RN going through the Cold War. Yes, they'll be fairly old by the time of the Falklands, but they will be better off in better condition than the light fleets were when the light fleets were retired, and that was a huge part of why the light fleets got retired, is the overhauls and rebuilds they would have needed just to maintain Catobar carrier capability in the Royal Navy were enormously expensive for
I do get
very
that.
little return.
But is it by the sheer fact that the government was already having problems with Stark Royal, even if we do trim a number of light fleets
I
down,
can actually answer this one.
the government is still having a whole bunch of issues money-wise.
I can
and
actually answer
unfortunately,
this
just
one.
see it ending in a bad state.
I can
Go on, then.
actually answer this one.
Yes, an answer.
It's literally all down to the Victorious rebuild. It is very hard to overstate just how much money and how much goodwill towards the carrier program Victorious and her rebuild sucked up.
Because you literally caught fire and burned it.
Drac and Dr. Clark have worked out that for the same amount of money that was spent on her rebuild, you could have built 3 Maltas and maintained them for about 5 years. Just
But
on
at
the
this
money
point,
they
then,
put
how
into
much
her
are you having to
rebuild.
change to do this?
Well,
I get that.
Yeah.
Thing is, you
the
just
entirety of Victoria, the rebuilds of Victorious,
that's the entirety
which
of
includes all the fire damage that they had
it
to fix.
does, but however, what I will say is, if you've got 4 Maltas, which are far easier to rework because of their larger displacement, and do not require the ridiculous gymnastics that rebuilding something like Victorious does to enable it to operate the fast jets of the period they wanted to operate, you're looking at a far easier rebuild cycle, you're looking at far less money being invested, you're looking at far less goodwill being sucked up. It is hard to overstate just how much easier and cheaper the Maltas make it to retain
I will point
a carrier
something out
fleet.
here, though, Fleet. Victorious refit was first considered it was started in the early 50s and went through 58. That is 5 years after the Maltas were all cancelled.
Yes, that plays exactly into my argument. You wouldn't be at all considering had those ships been built.
wouldn't. But I'm also then just trying to think. Again, sure, we've already got the alternative of somehow keeping Vanguard around, but how much else are we having to change to try and get 1 Malta actually produced?
Oh no, we're not saying the whole thing changes. Is if you're going to get the Maltas, you get them all or you get none. That's basically it. The only way.
If you have the money to consider keeping a battleship around, just to where you're like, oh yeah, this is a good capability to keep around.
I see them not getting all of them, Fleet, maybe getting 2.
It's the money to keep a battleship round in the 60s. We want this in the early 50s. The economy is in a very different shape in the early 50s than it is in the 60s.
Vanguard's basically... Well, Vanguard is finished at this point in time, so she's brand new.
Yes.
Whereas the Maltas are cancelled because we don't have the money to really build them. And the Audacious...
So, let me ask this question. When was Vanguard put in layup?
She was laid up. Let me have a look. Yeah, but
60, I believe.
Okay. So we'd be talking about keeping Vanguard around in service post that, so she gets modernized, right?
Right.
That's right. This is when the RN is considering the Maltas.
No, it's not.
No, it's
That's not.
Yes, it is. They're considering the requirements
No.
for carriers
But
then.
no,
That would
the
lead.
Malta. But no, the Malta was ordered in
50s,
1943.
right, sorry.
No, yeah, Malta's ordered 43, cancelled 45. This is
So
more
they're-
CVA 1 almost.
There. Yeah, CVA 01. Sorry,
the
I had the
CVA 1
time.
would
I had the time frames.
CVA 1 would potentially vastly change things. I have to agree. If you can get CVA 1, get CVA 1.
Yeah.
To bring a lot to the table.
I do.
Like-
I do question some of.
But then
the
again, that was
CVA
that was
01s.
63.
Yeah, I do question some of the
Oh.
design choices with CVA 01, but it would
I
be.
mean,
but
who
it's a
doesn't with, but
But it's a much
Um,
bigger, better carrier than your
okay,
old
having a
Audacious.
better immediate grasp of the time period.
Hmm.
Time periods we're talking about here, because I was unclear exactly on Vanguard's situation.
All right.
I would say that if you have the money in 1960 to modernize Vanguard and keep her around as a frontline fleet unit, you're probably not considering that, because you're probably looking at those light fleets going, oh my gosh, we need to replace these, not rebuild them.
The light fleets are already gone by this point from Royal Navy service.
Yeah, they've all been
Yeah.
sold.
19... They've
Yeah.
all been
Yeah,
sold,
either
so
not-
you're
oh,
looking
yeah.
at, so correction, you're looking at your carriers that you have and going, oh my gosh, outside of a couple of them, and you're going to probably be trying to spend that money to get another carrier.
Yeah, you're
technically,
looking
the
at
only two,
CVA 01.
there's two left. I think there's two left, which is. But
It
even
may
then,
not be CVA 01
you can
fleet,
be-
it may be something scaled down.
Because even for the time, assuming more money, CVA-1 was pretty unrealistic for Royal Navy.
Yeah.
Because they could build her, but keep her around.
And they
You're
want to,
like-
and they
probably
want
looking
to,
at something
yeah, and it gets even worse.
like Foch.
Yeah, it gets even worse because
Around.
CVA, they wanted 4. They wanted a complete like-for-like replacement of all the RN Catabar carriers, which is going to mean a scaling down. If they want to,
Yeah, if it's 1960 and you're comfortably considering a complete rebuild of Vanguard, because that's what would be getting you those 3-inch
Yeah.
guns, that would require a complete rebuild. Because of all the fire control, all the new radars, all that, and the guns and their lifts and their everything to support their automation. You're probably going to look at that and go, could do that, or I could replace at least 2 of those, the 2 worst of those carriers with 2 new ones. We can't afford CVA-01, but we do have a realistic option to get a smaller Catabar carrier and class it 2-ship class in service. Like, you've already got the air wings, and they'll be able to vastly be better at operating the extant air wings.
Out of curiosity, wouldn't that mean that there's, because the Sverdalovs are still around and the Soviet 6-inch cruisers? So wouldn't that,
So
if they've
you
got more money,
look at the towns.
yeah, wouldn't
or
that
you-
wouldn't that mean that you'd look at getting rid of the town class and like
No,
Tiger and Belfast, keeping Vanguard around because she's an overmatch against the Sverdlov, against
Don't
several
forget,
Sverdlovs.
Honestly, so
Constantly.
would a modernized town or the Tigers. Like, the Sverdlovs are not good ships. And the other thing to keep in mind here is NATO in this time period does not have a lack of gun cruisers.
they really
Oh
don't.
no, you need to. The balloon's gone up. Oh no, you need to borrow a couple of the American cruisers.
Or God forbid if you don't.
Looks at all the American gun
Yeah.
cruisers.
And I'm sorry, but if the Americans aren't available, you wouldn't go to the British, you'd go to the Dutch. They've got the better gun cruisers in Europe, not us.
But even a town, is if you modernize a town, for the cost of Vanguard, you can have multiple towns, right? And if you modernize them appropriately, namely fire control, they're gonna rip through it. They're gonna cause all sorts of problems for Sverdlov. They're incredibly well-built cruisers, and the Brits know they can take hits. So do the Soviets, by the way.
Hello?
Can I add a little tidbit to this?
Go on.
We have Buccaneers.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Buccaneers would, from what I understand, the Buccaneers, part of their strike role was to counter the Sverdlovs.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we just keep the Buccaneers? Don't need
Yeah,
to
and
build
and guess what? You'd be able to operate them even better off of these newer carriers.
Exactly. So why the point we talking about flipping gun cruisers when you just have
Because
a
not
counter to
all of your maritime strike capability in this period is day-night. That's the problem. There are attack modalities that you have with a Buccaneer or with an A6 for attacking at night, but one of the primary anti-ship weapons of this period in the 60s is the bullpup. You have to fly that missile onto a target you visually can see clearly with a little joystick. That's not an easy thing to do. You can come in on bombing runs, but that's going to leave you very vulnerable to radar-tracked quad 45 millimeter, as well as radar-tracked secondary guns. But the 45 millimeter is more the problem if you're coming in with bombs. So, I mean, you can launch attacks at night. That is useful, but it's still going to be really, really helpful to have at least one cruiser around with your carrier group. You're not yet in the period where the other escorts can just start slinging exosets at them and just sit there cackling. You're close, but you're not there yet. You're like a decade away, more or less. But
are we still on the question about Vanguard Falklands?
Just a quick question. What was the
Mhm.
Soviets' opinion on the town class?
I don't
They
know.
Because you
respected
mentioned
them.
that.
They were
And
they
what
were
did you
aware
say
of the hits that they were aware of the hits that towns took and what they pulled through. Like Belfast having her keel broken and still coming back. Like they were very well aware of what British cruisers could eat. Everyone was. The Soviet Navy respected Western ships.
Sheesh, Reaper, why do you have that many tabs open?
Right, I am going to do one more question, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Because unfortunately I do have other things I need to do before I go to bed tonight. So I need a good 20-30 minutes to do them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and pick the question I want to end on.
I've actually got a full list if you wish, Fleet.
I'm just going to scroll through and find it. Find something I want to
Fair
talk
enough.
about.
There's a
I found a fairly fun one, but it's fairly innocent. But it's actually a fairly
there's at least
interesting.
there's 25 questions left,
Um,
unfortunately.
It's a question from my wife. It's a fairly short one, but it's a fairly interesting thought to end on. Question: if you brought an M113 back to 1941, could the US build it, and would they adopt it over the half-track if they could build it?
They wouldn't adopt it over the half track. The everything about the half track was ease of everything in the field. They could the aluminum would be the problem. They could probably do a steel one. It would not be cheap to make if you made it out of aluminum. Like they could do it, but it would be pointlessly expensive. Like that's the main reason why like closed top full tracked APCs really weren't a thing in meaningful numbers in World War II was the expense. Like they could build them. They had the concept. It just was too expensive to use.
They just got better tanks of them, didn't they?
No, we did. The Americans
Go back
didn't.
the actual kangaroo.
We did. The
Yeah, but
British
that
did.
wasn't around in meaningful numbers either. The they could do an approximation pretty well. It's not the world's most complex engine or transmission. But the main reason the US half tracks had the rubber band tracks was ease of production, ease of maintenance, lower the amount of spare parts you need, right? M113s are full length, steel pin track with rubber pads. That was just out of the question as far as the US was concerned. It was part of the build-up for World War II that would lead to, in the 1950s, to the US going, yeah, no, we can build these now. We have the industry sitting here that enables us to build these cheaply. And you would rapidly see the US progress through a couple of APC designs until they settled on the 113 and then proceeded to to build an obtuse amount of them. It's the most produced armored vehicle in history.
Really?
Yes.
I thought they
The
were
Soviets
taking
didn't
P1.
beat it. No. Far more 113s were built than BMP-1s. Like the 113 is the most produced because it's basically a John Deere on 2 full-length tracks with tiller steering surrounded by welded aluminum. It's really easy to make in the late 50s, early 60s. Like, it's stupid easy to make. Like, it's simpler than the BTR.
That's an achievement.
And far easier to maintain.
That's not an achievement.
Like, it's there's a reason it is the baseline by which you judge APCs. Because it is the prototypical, full tracked, fully enclosed APC. Like, just definitionally.
Your M113 can be anything you put your mind to.
So, like, the simple thing is, Mo, they wouldn't use it for anything because it diverts too much aluminum away, or even steel away from what you need it. Like, because the other side of the fully enclosed APC is, this is an era before most militaries have a reliable airburst mechanism for artillery, right? So that's over the head coverage isn't all that important unless you're trying to fight mounted in a city, which was not at all the case with at least US infantry that's in half tracks, right? Wasn't the point. Particularly armored infantry. So, like, you wouldn't be fighting mounted. American infantry just didn't do that. And so they weren't as vulnerable as, say, Soviet troops going into Hungary to hand grenades dropped out of windows, or Molotov cocktails dropped out of windows. This is why the BTR-60 baseline does not have a roof, and the BTR-60P does. The fun times of the invasion of Hungary. It's where the Soviets learned they needed a roof. But, there are comments from Allied generals at the end of World War II of, we need to have a protected roof on our infantry transport because we opened a can of worms with the VT fuse. It's a good can of worms, but we need to prepare for it.
Well, folks,
Let's try about that. Minute Scott died.
wow, I'm turning into Dr. Clark / Drac. I'm actually getting questions that I'm going to have to answer next time.
Oh yeah, well, it's something that came to mind. Basically, when we keep getting
You're
the whole thing.
You are me
Well, wait,
now, Dragon.
No, would you like to know why this annoy? No, would you like to know why I'm actually doing this, Fleet?
Why?
Basically, I realized how many times do we keep getting asked the same question over and over and over? With this, I can mostly then go. I didn't actually say that one. Collingwood is something. Sorry. With this, I can just go. Well, yeah, it's in Fleet's rambling number XXX
I see.
sort of thing.
Oh, well,
So
that'll be handy.
if we've actually answered something 5, 6, 7 times over,
We can now no
we
longer
should say,
do
look,
that.
we've answered this multiple times already. Here was our opinion then. Sure, if you want to ask us it again, has our opinions changed? Perhaps then that could work. And this also, in case you're wondering with all the spelling mistakes, no, I have not edited these questions at all. So if anyone has spelling mistakes, that's why the spelling mistakes on this sheet.
Well, folks,
So what you're
is
saying, if there's spelling mistakes, y'all need to learn to spell better.
I'm not going to say that because I can't spell to save my life. So I'm just saying these spelling mistakes are at least not my fault.
right, folks. Thank you, everyone, for coming. One of the advantages of having an excellent panel, like we do have on Ramblings most of the time, is that we do tend to give the answers and the questions a really good, thorough shakeout. The only problem is we sometimes give them too thorough of a shakeout and go off on a ramble. But hey, that's the name of the show. Thank you, everyone, for coming, both in the audience and in the panel. Cyclic, as always, it's a pleasure having you. Same for you, Shipyard. Both your contributions appreciated. Thank you to my regular hosting team, Dragon and Foxo, as always. And I'll see you all next